Leo jolted awake with a gasp that tore through the silence of his apartment. His body was slick with sweat, the sheets tangled around his legs like frozen vines. For a moment, he didn't know where he was, only that he had been cold. So cold that his bones had felt like glass splinters under his skin. The memory was fragmented, a jagged shard of sensation, the biting wind, the taste of snow on his chapped lips, the distant glow of a bunker's floodlights, and the hollow ache of hunger that had long since faded into numbness. He had been begging. The name Marcus surfaced in his mind, accompanied by a surge of visceral hatred so sharp it made his chest tighten. He sat up, breathing ragged. The room was familiar, his pre-apocalypse apartment, with its beige walls, the faint smell of old coffee, and the digital clock on his nightstand glowing 3:14 a.m. But something was wrong. The cold from his dream clung to him, a phantom chill that made his fingers tremble as he reached for his phone. The screen lit up, blinding in the dark. The date stared back at him, October 23rd. Exactly 1 week before the world would freeze. Leo's breath hitched. He remembered now, not just the dream, but the reality that had come before it. The global flash freeze, the billions dead, the desperate scramble for warmth that had ended with him dying outside Marcus's fortified compound. He had been reborn. The knowledge settled in his gut like a stone, cold and undeniable. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, the floorboards creaking under his weight. His apartment felt too small, too fragile. Outside the window, the city lights twinkled innocently, unaware of the ice that would soon swallow everything. He stumbled to the bathroom, flicking on the light. His reflection in the mirror was pale, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, or become one. As he splashed water on his face, a strange sensation prickled at the edges of his consciousness. It was like a whisper in a language he almost understood. Closing his eyes, he focused. And there it was, an interface, hovering in his mind's eye. Crisp, minimalist lines outlined a grid of infinite squares, labeled Paradoxical Inventory. Below it, a bar glowed softly with the words Humanity Index, 100%. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the cheat he had vaguely hoped for in his past life, the tool that could save him. But the name Paradoxical sent a trickle of unease down his spine. He needed to test it. His eyes scanned the apartment, landing on a single can of beans sitting on the kitchen counter, left over from a rushed meal days ago. He picked it up, the metal cool against his palm. Focusing on the interface, he willed the can into the inventory. It vanished from his hand without a sound. In the grid, a single square now displayed a tiny icon of the can. A notification flashed, item stored. Humanity Index, 99.8%. And then the cost hit him. It wasn't pain, it was worse. A sharp, cold emptiness bloomed in his chest, as if a part of him had been scooped out and replaced with void. Accompanying it was a memory, vivid and warm, that flickered and dimmed. His mother's smile, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed as she taught him to bake cookies on a rainy afternoon. The memory didn't vanish entirely, but its edges blurred, the emotional weight leaching away until it felt like watching a scene through frosted glass. Leo gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white. The emptiness lingered, a hollow echo where that warmth had been. He stared at the interface, the Humanity Index, now glaring at him like an accusation. 99.8%. A 0.2% drop for 1 can of beans. The math was terrifying. If he stored enough to survive the apocalypse, what would be left of him? But the alternative was freezing to death again, begging at Marcus's gate. The memory of that cold, the helplessness, surged back. No. He wouldn't die like that. Not this time. Resolve hardened in his gut, cold and sharp. He would use the Paradoxical Inventory. He would pay the price. Because in a week, the only currency that would matter was survival. Leo moved with frantic purpose. He grabbed his laptop, pulling up his bank accounts. He had modest savings, enough for a down payment on a car, maybe a vacation. Now it would be his lifeline. He started liquidating everything, stocks, bonds, even the small cryptocurrency holdings he'd dabbled in. Transfer requests flew out into the digital ether. As he worked, the interface hovered in his peripheral vision, a constant reminder of the clock ticking down and the cost awaiting him. By dawn, he had a plan. He needed non-perishable food first, calories that would last. He drove to the nearest bulk warehouse store, the morning sun casting long shadows. The parking lot was nearly empty, the store just opening. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, illuminating aisles stacked high with goods. Leo grabbed a cart, his hands steady now. He moved with a focused efficiency, loading it with canned vegetables, meats, fruits, sacks of rice, beans, pasta. Each item was a calculation: nutritional value, shelf life, space efficiency. He avoided other shoppers, their casual chatter feeling alien. They were living in a world that would soon be gone, and he was already halfway out of it. At the checkout, the cashier, a middle-aged woman named Brenda with a name tag and tired eyes, raised an eyebrow at his mountain of cans. "Stocking up for the end of the world," she joked, her tone light. Leo forced a thin smile. "Something like that." His voice sounded flat to his own ears. He paid in cash, the bills feeling insubstantial. As he loaded the bags into his car, the trunk groaning under the weight, he felt the interface tug at his mind. It was time. Back in his apartment, he barricaded the door. The bag sat in the middle of the living room floor, a monument to his desperation. He knelt beside them, taking a deep breath. The emptiness from the first can still lingered, a faint chill in his core. He reached for a can of corn, the label bright and cheerful. Focusing, he activated the Paradoxical Inventory. The can disappeared. Humanity Index, 99.6%. The cold emptiness returned, sharper this time. Another memory slipped, his mother singing a lullaby, the tune growing faint, the comfort it once brought now distant. Leo clenched his teeth, grabbing another can. And another. He worked methodically, each activation a small death. Cans of beans, tomatoes, soup vanished into the grid. The Humanity Index ticked down, 99.4%, 99.2%, 99%. With each percentage point, something eroded. The fear of failure that had driven him since childhood, the anxiety that had kept him striving, began to dull, replaced by a cold certainty. The guilt he'd felt when he'd argued with Sarah last month, her tearful accusations, now felt like someone else's story. The warmth of human connection, the simple joy of sharing a meal, seemed like concepts from a textbook, intellectually understood but emotionally void. He moved to the bulk items, storing sacks of rice and beans. The emptiness intensified, spreading through him like frost on a windowpane. Humanity Index, 98.5%. He paused, breathing heavily. His reflection caught in a dark TV screen across the room, a pale, hunched figure surrounded by empty bags. He stood, stumbling to the bathroom again. He needed to see. Flicking on the light, he faced the mirror. The man staring back was him, but not. His eyes, once a warm brown, now looked dull, as if the light behind them had dimmed. They were less alive, flat and distant, like the eyes of a predator assessing prey. The hollow chill inside him seemed to gaze out through those eyes, a void where empathy had once resided. Leo leaned closer, his breath fogging the glass. He tried to summon a feeling, fear, regret, anything, but all that came was a cold, relentless resolve. The Paradoxical Inventory had given him a future, but with every can stored, it was eating the man who would live it. Leo stood before the bank teller's window, the polished marble counter cool beneath his palms. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting sterile white illumination across the transaction slips scattered before him. His reflection in the bulletproof glass showed a man with shadows beneath his eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. "You're sure about this?" the teller asked, her voice tinged with professional concern. "All 3 accounts? That's your entire liquid savings?" "Every last cent," Leo said, his voice flat. He watched as she processed the withdrawal, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. The numbers on the screen meant nothing to him now, just digits to be converted into survival. A memory tried to surface, his father teaching him to save, the pride in opening his first account at 16. But the memory slipped away like water through fingers, leaving only the faintest impression of warmth that vanished before he could grasp it. The cashier's name tag read, Janet. She was middle-aged with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. Leo noted these details clinically, as if observing a specimen. Yesterday, he might have felt something, gratitude for her concern, perhaps, or guilt for causing extra work. Today, there was only the calculation of time remaining, 6 days until the freeze. When the transaction completed and the confirmation slip printed, Janet handed it to him with a final, searching look. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Sterling." Leo took the slip without meeting her eyes. The paper felt insubstantial in his hand, yet it represented everything he'd built in this life. Or rather, everything he was about to dismantle. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down with cruel irony, a world unaware of the ice waiting in its future. Leo's car, a 5-year-old sedan he'd meticulously maintained, sat in the bank's parking lot. He ran his hand along its hood, the metal warm from the sun. Another memory tried to form, the day he'd bought it, the smell of new car interior, the satisfaction of his first major purchase as an adult. But the memory dissolved before it fully coalesced, leaving only the ghost of an emotion he could no longer name. He pulled out his phone and posted the car for sale on 3 different platforms. The description he wrote was efficient, stripped of any sentimentality. Within an hour, the first buyer arrived, a college student named Tyler who inspected the vehicle with the intense focus of someone stretching a limited budget. "Why are you selling so cheap?" Tyler asked, suspicion narrowing his eyes. "There's got to be something wrong with it." Leo almost laughed. What was wrong wasn't with the car, but with the world. "Instead," he said, "I need the money fast. Personal emergency." He watched Tyler's skepticism war with his desire for a good deal. The negotiation should have been tense, should have required emotional energy Leo no longer possessed. Instead, he simply stated his bottom price and waited, his mind already calculating how many cases of freeze-dried meals the money would buy. When Tyler finally agreed and handed over cash, Leo felt nothing. Not relief at the sale, not nostalgia for the car, not even the satisfaction of a transaction completed. He signed over the title with a signature that looked like his but felt like someone else's. As Tyler drove away in what had been Leo's car, Leo stood in the empty parking space and opened the Paradoxical Inventory interface in his mind. The mental space unfolded before him, a vast, dark expanse that seemed to stretch into infinity. At its center floated the humanity index, 98.7%. It had dropped again, just from the act of selling his car. Not from using the inventory, but from the emotional detachment required to sever another piece of his former life. He stored the cash in the inventory. The interface shimmered, and the money vanished from his hands. The humanity index ticked down to 98.5%. This time, the loss felt different, not a memory fading, but something deeper. When a homeless man approached him moments later, asking for spare change, Leo looked right through him. Yesterday, he would have felt a pang of sympathy, might have given a few dollars. Today, he simply walked past, the man's existence registering only as a potential threat assessment. Next came the warehouse. Leo drove a rental truck to an industrial district on the city's outskirts, where corrugated metal buildings stretched in monotonous rows. The leasing agent, a balding man named Carl with a too-tight suit, showed him Unit 47. 5,000 square feet, climate-controlled, security system included, Carl said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "What are you storing?" "Supplies," Leo said, his eyes scanning the dimensions. He imagined pallets stacked to the ceiling, aisles of survival gear. Lots of supplies. He paid 6 months up front in cash from the inventory, another tick down on the humanity index to 98.2%, and Carl handed over the keys with a shrug that said he'd seen stranger things. Alone in the warehouse, Leo began the real work. He pulled out his laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating his face in the dim space. For hours, he ordered with frenetic precision, 50 industrial generators, 200 cases of water purification tablets, medical kits by the dozen, thermal blankets, propane tanks, batteries in every size. His fingers flew across the keyboard, each click another item added to digital shopping carts, each purchase another step toward survival. The deliveries began arriving the next morning. Trucks pulled up to the warehouse loading dock, drivers looking confused at the volume but happy for the business. Leo supervised the unloading with detached efficiency, directing pallets to specific locations with military precision. When the first pallet of bottled water arrived, 500 cases stacked on a wooden platform, Leo waited until the delivery driver left. Then he approached the towering stack of plastic-wrapped supplies. He placed his hand on the shrink wrap, feeling the cool plastic beneath his palm. He activated the Paradoxical Inventory. The interface appeared in his mind, and he focused on the pallet. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the entire stack shimmered, its edges becoming indistinct, as if viewed through heat haze. It dissolved into particles of light that streamed into the mental vault. The process took less than 3 seconds. In the warehouse, where the pallet had stood, there was only empty concrete floor. Leo checked the humanity index, 97.8%. He felt the loss immediately. Not as a memory this time, but as an emotional void opening within him. He thought of Brenda, the cashier from the bulk store yesterday. He'd been short with her, rushing through the transaction. Yesterday, he might have regretted it later, might have made a mental note to be kinder next time. Now, the thought of Brenda provoked nothing, no guilt, no consideration, not even the recognition that his behavior had been less than ideal. He stored another pallet, this one of diesel fuel containers. The humanity index dropped to 97.5%. Another piece of empathy vanished. When he thought of the coming freeze, of the billions who would die, he felt no horror. Only calculation: how many would survive, what percentage would become threats, what resources they might try to take from him. Over the next 2 days, Leo became a machine of acquisition and storage. Pallet after pallet vanished into the paradoxical inventory: medical supplies, canned goods, ammunition, tools, clothing rated for extreme cold. With each activation, the vault in his mind seemed to expand, its boundaries pushing outward into mental space he hadn't known existed. He could feel its capacity growing, could sense the organized rows of supplies forming within it. And with each activation, his humanity eroded. By the 3rd day of warehouse operations, the humanity index read 95.2%. Leo stood before a mirror he'd hung on the warehouse wall, studying his reflection. His eyes had changed. Not just duller, as they'd been after the first storage attempts, but emptier. The blue irises seemed paler, as if bleached from within. When he tried to smile, the expression didn't reach his eyes. It was a mechanical contraction of facial muscles, devoid of warmth or meaning. He thought of his mother. The memory of her smile had been the first to go. Now he tried to recall her face, and found only a generic impression of a woman. He knew she had brown hair, knew she'd been kind, but he couldn't picture her features. The love he'd felt for her was now an intellectual fact, like knowing historical dates, devoid of emotional resonance. A delivery arrived, freeze-dried meals, enough to feed one person for a decade. The driver, a young man named Miguel with a tattoo of a rose on his forearm, helped unload the pallets. "Man, you preparing for the end of the world or something?" Miguel joked as they worked. Leo didn't answer. He simply checked off items on his clipboard. When Miguel finished and presented the invoice, Leo paid in cash from the inventory. As he counted out the bills, Miguel said, "Hey, you okay? You seem... I don't know. Spaced out." "I'm fine," Leo said, his voice monotone. Miguel hesitated, concern flickering in his eyes. "You sure? My cousin went through some depression last year, and he had that same 1,000-yard stare. If you need to talk." "I don't," Leo cut him off. He handed over the cash. "Thank you for the delivery." Miguel opened his mouth to say more, then seemed to think better of it. He took the money with a final, worried glance, then climbed into his truck and drove away. Leo stored the freeze-dried meals. The humanity index dropped to 94.7%. This time, the loss was different. It wasn't a memory or an emotion, but something more fundamental: his capacity for connection. When he thought of ever having friends, of sharing experiences with others, it felt like reading about a foreign culture. He understood the concept intellectually, but couldn't imagine ever wanting it again. On the 4th day, with the warehouse nearly emptied of deliveries, Leo began the final phase: securing the bunker location. He'd identified a remote property in the mountains, a decommissioned government facility built during the Cold War. The owner was an elderly man named Walter who'd inherited the property and wanted nothing to do with it. They met at a diner halfway between the city and the mountains. Walter had hands gnarled with arthritis and eyes that had seen too much. "Place is a relic," Walter said over coffee that smelled burnt. "My uncle worked there back in the 60s. Said they monitored Soviet transmissions or some such. Been empty 30 years. I want it," Leo said. Walter studied him. "Most people want houses with picket fences. Not concrete bunkers in the middle of nowhere. What's your angle?" Privacy, Leo said. The word felt hollow in his mouth. The negotiation should have taken hours. Should have involved back and forth, compromise, the dance of buyer and seller. But Leo had no patience for dances. He named a price 50% above asking, in cash, immediate transfer. Walter's eyebrows rose. That's more than generous. Do we have a deal? They did. Papers were signed right there in the diner booth, the vinyl seats creaking beneath them. Leo paid from the inventory, another tick down on the humanity index to 93.4%, and Walter handed over the keys with a shake of his head. Hope you find what you're looking for out there, Walter said. Leo didn't answer. He was already calculating how many solar panels he'd need to power the bunker, how much insulation to add, what sight lines needed covering for defensive positions. He returned to the warehouse for one final storage session. Only a few pallets remained, the last of the medical supplies, some communication equipment, and a crate of luxury items he'd ordered almost as an afterthought, fine chocolates, aged whiskey, a collection of classic films on physical media. Things to make survival more than mere existence. He stored the medical supplies first. The humanity index dropped to 92.8%. The communication equipment next, 92.5%. Finally, the luxury crate. He placed his hand on the wooden box, feeling the grain beneath his fingers. He remembered ordering these items, remembered thinking they would help him retain some semblance of his former self, some connection to the world that was about to die. Now the thought seemed absurd. What did chocolate matter in a frozen world? What was the point of whiskey when you couldn't feel the warmth it promised? He activated the inventory. The crate vanished. And in his mind, the paradoxical interface shimmered, then reconfigured itself. New information appeared beside the humanity index, a notification in glowing text that pulsed with ominous rhythm. Leo stared at it. The numbers seemed to burn themselves into his consciousness. Humanity index, 92%. Critical threshold approaching. He stood in the empty warehouse, surrounded by nothing but concrete and echoes. The notification didn't fade. It remained, a permanent addition to the interface, a quantifiable measure of everything he was losing. He'd known the cost intellectually, had felt each incremental loss. But seeing it there, reduced to a percentage, made it real in a way nothing else had. 92%. 8% of his humanity gone in less than a week. What would remain at 50%? At 20? At 0? He tried to feel fear at the realization, tried to summon the horror that should accompany watching one's soul erode by measurable increments. But the emotion wouldn't come. He could think the words, I should be afraid, but couldn't feel the fear itself. The warehouse was silent. Outside, the world continued, unaware that in 6 days it would freeze, that billions would die, that the man standing in this empty building had already begun the process of becoming something less than human in order to survive what was coming. Leo closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, the notification still glowed, 92%. A number. A percentage. A price paid. He opened his eyes and looked at his reflection in the warehouse window. The man staring back had eyes like chips of ice in a face that showed nothing at all. The mountain road wound upward like a serpent's spine, each switchback revealing more of the valley below shrinking into miniature. Leo gripped the steering wheel of the rented moving truck, his knuckles pale against the dark leather. The paradoxical inventory interface hovered at the edge of his consciousness, a constant presence he'd learned to ignore like a phantom limb. He'd spent the last 3 days loading this truck with the most essential supplies from the warehouse, the generators, the water filtration systems, the medical kits, everything too bulky or complex to risk storing through the inventory unless absolutely necessary. Every mile up the mountain felt like shedding another layer of his old life. The city behind him was already preparing for winter, unaware that this winter would never end. He'd sold his apartment, emptied his accounts, severed every tie except the ones that still clung like cobwebs in the corners of his mind. The humanity index glowed softly in his mental periphery, 92%. A number that meant nothing and everything. The bunker came into view suddenly, a concrete dome half buried in the mountainside with a heavy steel door that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. Walter had called it a renovated missile silo with pride in his voice, as if selling someone their own tomb was an accomplishment. Leo parked the truck and stepped out into the thin mountain air. The silence here was different from the city, not peaceful, but watchful. The trees stood like sentinels, their branches bare against the grey sky. He approached the door, the key Walter had given him cold in his hand. The lock turned with a satisfying thunk that echoed in the concrete entryway. Inside, the air smelled of concrete dust and new paint. Walter hadn't lied about the renovations. The main living space stretched out before him, a circular room 30 feet across with reinforced walls and LED lighting already installed. To the left, a kitchenette with stainless steel appliances. To the right, a sleeping area partitioned off by a curtain. And at the far end, the storage rooms, his real purpose here. For the next 6 hours, Leo worked methodically, unloading crate after crate from the truck. He used a hand truck for the heavier items, the wheels squeaking on the concrete floor. Each trip was a calculation. The paradoxical inventory whispered to him, offering the easy solution. Just store it all at once. Be done in minutes instead of hours. But he remembered the last time he'd used it extensively, the way memories had slipped away like sand through fingers. The taste of his mother's Sunday pot roast that he could no longer quite recall. The sound of his father's voice reading bedtime stories that had become muffled, distant. So he worked manually, sweat soaking through his shirt despite the chill. He positioned the generators in the power room, connected the water filtration system to the underground cistern, arranged the medical supplies in labeled cabinets. With each item placed, he felt a strange satisfaction, not the cold efficiency of the inventory's storage, but something more tangible. These were things he could touch, could see. They wouldn't disappear into that extra-dimensional void that was slowly eating him from the inside. He was halfway through unloading the ammunition crates when headlights cut through the gathering dusk. Leo froze, a box of 9mm rounds heavy in his arms. No one should be up here. Walter had promised complete privacy, had said the nearest neighbor was miles down the mountain. The car, a familiar blue sedan, pulled up beside his truck. The door opened, and Sarah stepped out. For a moment, Leo just stared. She looked exactly as he remembered from before the freeze in his past life. The same blonde hair pulled into a practical ponytail. The same sharp eyes that missed nothing. The same mouth that had smiled at him over coffee while planning how to steal what little he had left when society collapsed. In his memories of that other timeline, she'd been one of the first to turn on him, trading his location to Marcus for an extra ration card. Leo. Her voice carried across the gravel parking area. What are you doing all the way up here? He set the ammunition crate down carefully, buying time. The paradoxical interface flickered in his mind, showing him the quickest way to store everything and disappear. But that would mean using it. That would mean losing more of himself. Just some renovations, he called back, forcing his voice to sound casual. Walter said this place needed work. Sarah approached, her boots crunching on the gravel. She glanced at the open bunker door, then at the half-unloaded truck. Renovations? With enough supplies to survive a nuclear winter? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Since when did you get into prepping? Since the weather report started looking scary. Leo kept his body between her and the open crate of ammunition. You know how I am. Always over-preparing. She moved closer, peering past him into the bunker. This is more than over-preparing, Leo. This is. She trailed off, taking in the organized stacks of supplies, the professional-grade equipment. Where did you get the money for all this? The question hung in the air. Leo felt the paradoxical inventory stirring, offering solutions. He could store the evidence. He could make her forget. But each option came with a price, a memory, a feeling, a piece of what made him human. I sold everything, he said truthfully. The apartment. The car. My grandmother's jewelry. And you're putting it all into this, hole in the ground? Sarah's voice held that familiar mixture of concern and condescension that had always made him feel small. Leo, come on. If there's really some disaster coming, you should be with people. With friends. The word friends tasted like ash. In his past life, she'd said the same thing right before betraying him. Right before leading Marcus's men to his hiding place. I'm better off on my own, he said, his voice flat. She studied his face, and Leo realized with a start that she was looking for something, some sign of the person she'd known. But that person was already fading. The humanity index ticked downward in his mind, not from any active use of the inventory, but simply from standing here, from remembering, from feeling the ghost of betrayal that should have been rage but was now just data. "You've changed," Sarah said softly. "Everyone changes." She gestured toward the ammunition crate. "Not like this. Since when do you know anything about guns?" Leo's mind worked quickly. He needed her gone. Needed her to leave without asking more questions. The paradoxical inventory whispered again, and this time he listened. Just one small storage. Just the ammunition crate. It would be quick. Discreet. She wouldn't even notice. He reached down as if to adjust the crate, letting his fingers brush the rough wood. In his mind, he activated the storage function. The crate vanished silently, leaving only the faint impression of its weight in the gravel. The cost was immediate. A memory surfaced, Sarah laughing at one of his terrible jokes during a college study session, her head thrown back, the sound genuine and warm. They'd been friends then. Real friends. The memory played behind his eyes like an old film, and as he watched, the colors faded. The sound grew muffled. The feeling of camaraderie, of shared amusement, dissolved like sugar in water. When it was gone, all that remained was the factual knowledge: Sarah had laughed at his joke once. No emotion attached. No warmth. The humanity index updated, 91.2%. Sarah blinked, looking at the empty space where the crate had been. "Did you?" She shook her head. "I could have sworn." "It's getting dark," Leo said, his voice perfectly calm. The lie came easily now. Too easily. "You should head back before the road gets icy." She looked from him to the bunker entrance, suspicion warring with confusion on her face. "What are you really doing up here, Leo?" "Surviving," he said, and for the first time, he heard the emptiness in his own voice. The lack of fear, of urgency, of anything at all. "You should think about doing the same." For a long moment, they stood in silence. The wind picked up, whistling through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, an animal cried out, a lonely sound in the gathering dark. Finally, Sarah took a step back. "Fine. Keep your secrets. But when whatever you're preparing for happens." She let the threat hang unfinished. The same unfinished threat she'd made in another life. She turned and walked back to her car. Leo watched her go, waiting for some feeling to surface. Anger. Hurt. Even nostalgia. But there was nothing. Just the cold calculation of risk assessment. She was a variable. A potential threat. Nothing more. As her taillights disappeared down the mountain road, Leo returned to the bunker. He worked through the night, installing the security systems he'd purchased. Motion sensors around the perimeter. Cameras with night vision. A reinforced steel bar for the main door. Each task was completed with mechanical precision. He didn't tire. He didn't need breaks. The paradoxical inventory hummed in the background, a constant reminder of the power he wasn't using, and the price he would pay when he did. Near dawn, he stepped outside to check the perimeter sensors. The sky was the color of bruised flesh, heavy with clouds that promised snow. He looked up, and the first flakes began to fall. They weren't supposed to come until tomorrow. The forecast had been clear, one more day of preparation time. But here they were, drifting down silently, catching in his hair, melting on his skin. The freeze was coming early. Leo watched the snow, waiting for panic to set in. Waiting for the adrenaline rush, the frantic need to hurry, to finish, to survive. But his heart beat at its normal pace. His breathing remained even. The only thing that changed was the number in his mind. The humanity index ticked downward, 88%. He felt nothing as he watched Sarah's tracks disappear under the gathering white. Nothing as he thought of her driving back to a world that would be frozen solid in days. Nothing as he turned and walked back into the bunker that was now his tomb and his fortress. The steel door closed behind him with a final, echoing thud. Outside, the snow fell faster, covering everything in a blanket of silent white. The first snowflake that landed on Leo's bunker camera at dawn had been a warning. By noon, it was a prophecy fulfilled. Leo sat in the bunker's control room, a semicircle of monitors bathing his face in pale blue light. The temperature reading on his external sensor had been dropping steadily all morning, from 28 degrees Fahrenheit to 15 degrees Fahrenheit to -2 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, as he watched, it plunged to -22 degrees Fahrenheit and kept falling. The numbers blurred in his vision for a moment, and he blinked, trying to focus. The paradoxical interface in his mind flickered, displaying his humanity index at 88%, unchanged since yesterday but feeling heavier somehow, like a weight settling in his chest. On the main monitor, news channels streamed chaos. A reporter in New York stood bundled in multiple coats, her breath visible in great white plumes as she shouted over howling wind. Temperatures dropping at unprecedented rates across the globe, power grids failing, authorities urging citizens to shelter in place. The feed cut to footage from London, cars abandoned in frozen streets, people huddled in doorways, their faces pale with shock and cold. Tokyo showed similar scenes, the familiar neon signs dark against a sky turning the color of bruised steel. Leo reached for the remote and turned up the volume. The reporter's voice grew clearer, edged with panic. Meteorologists are calling this a flash freeze event unlike anything in recorded history. We're receiving reports that temperatures may drop below -40 degrees Fahrenheit in some regions within hours. Repeat, this is not a drill. Seek immediate shelter and... The screen went black as the power grid failed somewhere along the transmission line. He switched to another channel. Same story. Another. Static. The world was going dark, one signal at a time. Outside his bunker, through the reinforced camera lenses, the mountain landscape transformed. What had been rocky terrain dusted with morning snow became a crystalline wasteland. Trees groaned under the weight of ice forming on their branches. The wind picked up, howling against the bunker's exterior with a sound like a wounded animal. Leo watched as a bird, a sparrow or finch, he couldn't tell from this distance, tried to take flight from a frozen branch. It made it 3 feet before dropping like a stone, its tiny body hitting the ice with a soft thud he couldn't hear but imagine perfectly. He stood and walked to the bunker's main door, a slab of reinforced steel 12 inches thick. His hand hovered over the manual locking mechanism, 3 heavy bolts that would seal him in completely. For a moment, he hesitated. The memory of freezing to death in his past life surfaced, the numbness starting in his fingers and toes, creeping inward, the desperate pounding on Marcus's bunker door, the final realization that no one would answer. His fingers tightened on the first bolt. It slid home with a solid clunk that echoed through the bunker's entry chamber. The second bolt followed, then the third. Each sound was final, definitive. He was sealing himself in with his hoard, with his power, with the emptiness growing inside him. Returning to the control room, Leo noticed the temperature inside the bunker holding steady at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The geothermal heating system Walter had installed was working perfectly. The contrast between his warmth and the freezing world outside should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt like a mathematical equation, inputs and outputs, cause and effect. The humanity index in his mind remained at 88%, but something had shifted. The number seemed less like a measurement of himself and more like data on a screen. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since yesterday. Closing his eyes, Leo accessed the Paradoxical Inventory. The interface appeared in his mind's eye, a vast, dark space filled with neatly organized stacks of his hoard. Food section, subsection, canned goods. He focused on a can of beef stew, one of thousands identical to it. With a thought, he retrieved it. The can materialized in his hand, cold from the extra-dimensional storage. At the same time, a familiar hollow sensation opened in his chest. The paradoxical interface displayed a notification, Humanity Index, 87.8%. A memory dissolved, not dramatically, but like ink fading on old paper. He'd been trying to remember his mother's beef stew, the way she'd make it on cold Sundays, the particular blend of spices she used that made it taste like home. Now he could recall eating stew, could remember his mother in the kitchen, but the taste itself was gone. The sensory memory had evaporated, leaving only the factual knowledge that it had once existed. He opened the can with a manual opener from his supplies, no need to waste inventory activations on tools he could keep physically. As he heated the stew on the bunker's induction stove, he monitored the cameras. One screen showed the approach road to his bunker, now covered in a sheet of ice. Another showed the valley below, where the town of Silver Creek was probably already experiencing the first wave of panic. A third screen was tuned to a frequency that monitored local emergency bands. Static mostly, but occasionally a broken transmission, need medical, generator failed, temperatures dropping too fast. The stew tasted like nutrients. Like protein and carbohydrates. He ate methodically, watching the screens. After eating, he realized he was still wearing the same clothes from yesterday, jeans and a sweater. The bunker was warm, but something in him wanted the ritual of preparation. He accessed the inventory again, this time focusing on the clothing section. A heavy thermal sweater and insulated pants materialized in his hands. Humanity Index, 87.5%. This time, the loss was different. Not a memory, but a capacity. He tried to remember what it felt like to be truly cold, not the intellectual knowledge that cold was unpleasant, but the visceral fear of it, the way it made your bones ache and your thoughts slow. The memory of freezing to death in his past life was still there as a fact, but the emotional texture was gone. He knew he had died cold and afraid, but he couldn't feel the echo of that fear anymore. It was like reading about someone else's death in a history book. As he changed into the warmer clothes, the paradoxical interface displayed another notification: storage capacity enhanced, sensory link established. He paused, focusing on the new information. The interface explained that with his humanity index dropping below certain thresholds, the inventory was developing new capabilities. He could now sense items within it without visualizing them, a kind of extra-dimensional awareness of his own hoard. He tested it. Closing his eyes, he didn't just see the inventory's contents, he felt them. The mountains of canned goods were a dense, heavy presence. The fuel reserves hummed with potential energy. The weapons were sharp edges in the darkness. The luxury items, the fine wines, the artwork he'd stored as barter goods, felt smooth and polished. His entire hoard was mapped in his consciousness, not as images but as sensations. And with this new awareness came another realization: the hoard felt more real to him than the world outside. The people freezing and dying on his screens were becoming abstractions, while the cans of beans and barrels of fuel in his inventory had tangible presence. He pushed the thought aside and returned to the monitors. Switching to a different camera feed, he zoomed in on Marcus's compound in the valley below. In his past life, this view had been his last sight, the warlord's fortified settlement glowing with light and warmth while Leo froze outside its gates. Now, through the camera's enhanced lens, he could see the compound in detail. Smoke rose from several chimneys, but less than there should have been. Figures moved between buildings, hunched against the wind. One of the perimeter fences had collapsed under the weight of ice. As Leo watched, a group of survivors approached the compound's main gate, ordinary people from the looks of them, families with children, carrying whatever belongings they could. They pounded on the gate. After several minutes, armed guards appeared on the walls above them. There was an exchange Leo couldn't hear, then the guards shook their heads. The people begged, gestures desperate even from this distance. One of the guards raised a rifle, not firing but making the threat clear. The survivors retreated, stumbling back into the freezing wind. Leo felt nothing. No satisfaction at Marcus's harshness, no pity for the turned-away survivors. He made a note to monitor the compound's energy signatures. If their generators failed, they'd be vulnerable. The thought was tactical, clean, devoid of emotion. He spent the next several hours performing bunker maintenance checks. The air filtration system hummed efficiently. The water recycling tanks were at 98% capacity. The backup power system showed all green lights. His hoard, both physically present in the bunker's storage rooms and held in the paradoxical inventory, was organized and catalogued. Everything was perfect. And yet, as he stood in the center of his control room surrounded by screens showing a world freezing to death, he felt a peculiar emptiness. Not loneliness, that would require missing other people, and he found he didn't. Not fear, he was safe here, protected by steel and concrete and his own preparations. Just emptiness. A hollow space where human concerns should have been. The paradoxical interface confirmed it: humanity index, 87.0%. The drop had been gradual as he went about his tasks, each minor interaction with the inventory, checking supplies, retrieving small items, chipping away fractions of percentage points. He'd forgotten the sound of his father's voice. The memory of his first kiss was gone, leaving only the knowledge that it had happened. The particular shade of blue of his childhood bedroom walls had faded from his mind. As evening deepened outside, the temperature dropped to -45 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind became a constant scream against the bunker's exterior. On the monitors, the world had turned monochrome, whites and grays and the deep blue of shadows where the cold was most intense. That's when he saw them on the approach road camera. 5 figures, maybe 6, moving slowly up the mountain road toward his bunker. They were bundled in whatever clothing they'd managed to find, thick coats, scarves wrapped around faces, gloves that probably did little against this cold. One of them stumbled and was helped up by another. They moved with the desperate determination of people who knew stopping meant death. Leo zoomed the camera in. Their faces were pale, lips blue with cold. Frost clung to their eyelashes and the edges of their scarves. They carried bags, backpacks, duffels, one had what looked like a child's school backpack. As he watched, the lead figure pointed toward his bunker. They picked up their pace, struggling through snow that was now knee-deep in places. He checked other cameras. No vehicles behind them, they'd come on foot, probably from Silver Creek when the town lost power. No weapons visible, though that meant little. They were desperate, and desperate people became dangerous. The group reached the bunker's outer perimeter, a fence line 50 yards from the main entrance that was mostly symbolic but marked the boundary of Walter's property. They paused there, huddling together for a moment. Then they pushed through the gate and kept coming. 40 yards. 30. Leo's hand went to the security system controls. He had options. External speakers to warn them away. Non-lethal deterrence. Or, if necessary, lethal measures. The bunker was equipped for all scenarios. 20 yards. The lead figure, a man, Leo thought, though it was hard to tell under all the layers, looked up directly at the camera mounted above the bunker door. His face was raw with cold, eyes wide with a mixture of hope and desperation. He raised a hand, not in threat but in appeal. 10 yards. They reached the bunker door. The man pounded on it with a fist made clumsy by cold. The sound echoed through the bunker's entry chamber, dull thuds against 12 inches of steel. Please. The voice was muffled by the door and the man's scarf, but audible through the external microphone. Please, we saw lights. We're freezing. Just let us in for the night. Another voice, higher pitched, a woman or maybe a teenager, we have children. Please. More pounding. Desperate, rhythmic. For the first time since the freeze began, Leo felt something. A flicker in his chest, faint but unmistakable. Pity. These people were going to die out there. They'd freeze just as he had in his past life, begging at a door that wouldn't open. The memory of that death was still factual in his mind, and for a second, the emotion attached to it tried to resurface, the fear, the betrayal, the final crushing cold. He looked at the control panel. His finger hovered over the intercom button. He could tell them to take shelter in the old equipment shed 50 yards back down the slope. It wouldn't be warm, but it would block the wind. He could even retrieve some blankets from the inventory, toss them out the security hatch. It would cost him maybe 0.2% of his humanity index, but they might live. The pounding continued. Please. We can see your lights. We know someone's in there. The flicker of pity warmed in his chest, a tiny flame in the growing cold inside him. Then the paradoxical interface displayed his current humanity index, 87.0%. And next to it, almost as a reminder, his inventory statistics: food, 8,542 tons, water, 4,200,000 gallons, fuel, 1,850,000 liters, weapons, 427 units, luxury goods, 1,240 items. The numbers were clean. Precise. They represented safety. Survival. Control. The pity flickered again, trying to grow. Leo thought about opening the door. 5 or 6 people. They'd need food, water, warmth. They'd see his supplies, his bunker. They might become threats. They'd certainly become complications. In a week, or a month, when supplies ran low everywhere else, they might try to take what he had. They might betray him as Sarah had. As Marcus had. The pounding became more frantic. Please. God, please. The flicker of pity guttered, drowned by cold logic. By the numbers on the screen. By the memory of betrayal that still existed as fact even if he could no longer feel its sting. His finger moved from the intercom button to the external speaker control. He pressed it. His voice, when it emerged from the speakers mounted above the bunker door, was flat. Empty. This property is private. Leave immediately. The pounding stopped. Silence for 3 heartbeats. Then, we'll die out here. Leave, Leo repeated. Or I will use force. He didn't wait for a response. He activated the perimeter lights, floodlights that bathed the area around the bunker door in harsh white light. Through the camera, he saw the figures flinch, raising hands to shield their eyes. For a moment, they stood frozen, not by cold but by disbelief. Then, slowly, they turned and began trudging back the way they'd come, shoulders slumped with a defeat more complete than mere physical exhaustion. Leo watched them until they disappeared into the storm. Then he turned off the lights and returned to his monitors. The paradoxical interface updated, humanity index, 86.8%. He'd felt that flicker of pity. And he'd chosen to extinguish it. The cost was quantified now, another 0.2% gone. Another fragment of his soul traded for the security of his hoard. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, the bunker was silent except for the hum of machines. Leo sat before his screens, watching a world freeze to death, and wondered when he'd stop feeling even the flickers. The pounding had stopped hours ago, but the silence that replaced it felt heavier. Leo stood in the main chamber of his bunker, the reinforced steel door at his back, and listened to the absence. No more desperate fists against metal, no more ragged pleas for mercy. Just the low hum of generators and the faint hiss of climate control keeping the temperature at a perfect 72 degrees Fahrenheit. He turned away from the door. The bunker spread before him, a cathedral of survival. Rows of industrial shelving stretched into the dimly lit space, each loaded with precisely organized supplies. Medical kits in sealed plastic, their expiration dates carefully noted. Cases of Murray's stacked like bricks in a wall. Water purification systems still in their factory packaging. Fuel drums lined up along the far wall, enough to power the generators for years. He'd built this fortress with meticulous care, and now it was his alone. But the emptiness inside the bunker mirrored something growing inside him. A hollow space where memories used to live. Leo walked to the central control station, a bank of monitors showing security feeds from outside. The cameras revealed only swirling snow and darkness now. The survivors who'd begged at his door were gone, vanished into the whiteout. He felt nothing about their disappearance. Not relief, not guilt. Just, nothing. He needed to fill the silence. With a thought, he summoned the Paradoxical Inventory interface. The familiar translucent screen materialized before him, glowing with an eerie blue light. In the upper right corner, the humanity index read 86.8%, the number a cold reminder of what each activation cost him. Below it, the inventory list scrolled endlessly, thousands of items categorized and indexed. Food, water, medicine, weapons, tools, raw materials. And at the bottom, a new section he'd created, luxury. He focused on that section now. Not survival essentials, but comforts. Things to stave off the boredom that would inevitably come during the long frozen years ahead. His fingers hovered in the air, tracing through the virtual list. Retrieve, Macallan 25-year-old Scotch whiskey. The interface flickered. A bottle materialized on the control console, the amber liquid catching the overhead lights. The glass felt cool and smooth in his hand. He remembered buying this bottle 3 days ago, back when money still meant something. He'd walked into the high-end liquor store, his bank account swollen from liquidating everything he owned, and pointed at the most expensive scotch they had. The clerk had looked at him with a mixture of awe and suspicion as he paid in cash. But now, as he held the bottle, he couldn't remember the clerk's face. Or the store's name. Or the drive there. The memory had been there just moments before, a clear image of the oak-paneled shop, the smell of polished wood and aged spirits, but now it was gone. Erased. Like someone had taken an eraser to a chalkboard drawing of his life. The humanity index ticked down to 85.1%. Leo didn't flinch. He poured 2 fingers of scotch into a crystal tumbler he retrieved next, the glass appearing from the inventory with another flicker of the interface. The whiskey burned going down, rich and smoky. It should have been satisfying. It was just liquid. He set the glass aside and returned to the interface. Retrieve Oculus Quest Pro VR headset with full gaming library. The headset and controllers appeared on the console. He remembered ordering this online, along with dozens of other entertainment systems. Video games, movies, books, music, enough digital distraction to last a lifetime. He'd been excited about it then. Looking forward to losing himself in virtual worlds when the real one froze over. Now he picked up the headset, turning it over in his hands. The plastic felt lightweight, the lenses dark and empty. He tried to remember why he'd chosen this model specifically. There had been reviews, comparisons, specifications he'd studied for hours. All gone. Vanished into the same void that had taken the liquor store memory. The humanity index dropped to 83.4%. A notification appeared on the interface, * retrieval speed enhanced by 18%. Sensory link stabilization improved, *. The paradoxical inventory was growing more powerful even as he grew less human. The trade-off was working exactly as advertised. He could now sense items within the vault without visually browsing, a vague awareness of their location and condition, like feeling objects in a dark room. And retrieval was nearly instantaneous now, items appearing the moment he thought of them. He put on the VR headset. The world went black, then resolved into a virtual home screen floating in space. Game icons orbited around him. He selected one at random, a fantasy RPG with dragons and castles. For an hour, he fought digital monsters. The graphics were stunning, the gameplay smooth and immersive. He should have been entertained. He felt nothing. Just the mechanical press of buttons, the movement of virtual limbs. When he took the headset off, his eyes were dry and tired. The whiskey glass sat untouched where he'd left it. He returned both items to the inventory. The bottle and headset vanished from the physical world, stored away in the extra-dimensional space. 2 more activations. 2 more costs. The humanity index read 81.9%. And this time, something bigger went. Leo froze, his hand still extended toward where the VR headset had been. A memory surfaced, then dissolved like sugar in water. A girl's face. Dark hair falling around her shoulders. A smile that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. They'd been sitting on a park bench, sharing ice cream on a summer day. He could almost taste the vanilla, feel the sun on his skin. Her name was, what was her name? He grasped for it, mentally scrambling through the fading fragments. They'd met in college. She studied art history. They'd dated for a year. 2. He couldn't remember. The details slipped through his fingers like sand. The color of her eyes. The sound of her laugh. The way she said his name. Gone. All of it. His first love. Erased from his mind as completely as if she'd never existed. Leo stood perfectly still, waiting for the grief to hit. For the pain of loss. For something. Anything. Nothing came. Just that same hollow emptiness, now slightly larger. A new chamber excavated in the cavern of his soul. The interface glowed patiently before him. The humanity index now read 80.7%. He'd crossed another threshold. 80%. Only 4/5 of a human being remaining. He walked to the airlock chamber, where a small access port allowed sampling of the outside environment without compromising the bunker's integrity. Through the thick plexiglass viewport, he could see the storm still raging. Snow piled against the exterior in deep drifts. The temperature gauge read -22 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. An idea occurred to him. An experiment. He activated the sampling mechanism. A robotic arm extended through the port, scooped up a handful of snow and ice from outside, then retracted into a sterile containment unit inside the bunker. The ice glittered under the interior lights, already beginning to melt in the warmth. Leo focused on the paradoxical inventory interface. Store, ice sample from external environment. The ice vanished from the containment unit. The interface flickered, then displayed a new notification, * item stored. Preservation protocols activated. Temperature stabilization field engaged, *. The vault had adapted. It wasn't just storing the ice, it was preserving it at exactly the temperature and conditions it had been collected in. Perfect cryogenic storage. If he stored a living thing. He pushed the thought away. Not yet. Maybe never. The humanity index ticked down to 79.9%. And with it went another piece of his capacity for empathy. He tried to think about the people outside freezing to death. The families huddled in collapsing homes. The children. He should feel something. Horror. Pity. Even scientific curiosity. He felt nothing. Just clinical assessment. Mortality rates. Resource scarcity. Threat vectors. He was becoming a perfect survival machine. And the machine didn't need empathy. Leo returned to the control station. The scotch bottle was gone, stored away. The VR headset was gone. All his comforts were back in the vault, and he was alone with the hum of machinery and the glowing screens. He pulled up the security footage archives, scrolling back through the external camera recordings. He'd been reviewing them periodically, monitoring for threats. But now he had a different purpose. He needed to see what was happening out there. Not for tactical reasons, but, he wasn't sure why. Some lingering ghost of human curiosity, perhaps. The footage showed the storm in reverse, snow flying upward, darkness giving way to twilight. He fast-forwarded to the pre-dawn hours, when the light was just beginning to filter through the blizzard. Camera 3, pointed toward the valley where Marcus's compound stood about 5 miles distant. The zoom was maximum, the image grainy through the snow, but recognizable. Marcus's place was a converted warehouse surrounded by a makeshift fence. Vehicles parked haphazardly. Figures moving between buildings. Leo watched as a group approached the compound's main gate. 6 people, maybe 7, hunched against the wind. Even through the poor resolution, he could see they were in bad shape, limping, supporting each other, clothes inadequate for the cold. Survivors looking for shelter. The compound gate remained closed. Figures appeared on the walls, Marcus's guards, armed with rifles. There was an exchange, though the audio didn't pick up words at this distance. Gestures. Pleading from the survivors. Shaking heads from the guards. Then one of the survivors stepped forward, closer to the camera's view. A woman. Her hood was down, her face exposed to the biting wind. Dark hair whipped across features that were gaunt with cold and exhaustion. Leo leaned closer to the screen. He knew that face. Sarah. His former friend. The one who'd betrayed him before the freeze. The one who'd come snooping around his bunker just days ago, suspicious and probing. She'd driven away in her SUV, confident she could survive what was coming. Now here she was, begging at Marcus's gate. Just as Leo had begged at that same gate in his past life, before freezing to death in the snow. The scene unfolded with terrible familiarity. Sarah gestured desperately toward the compound. One of the guards raised his rifle, pointing it at the group. The other survivors backed away, but Sarah stood her ground, still pleading. The guard fired. Not at Sarah. A warning shot into the air. Snow kicked up where the bullet struck a drift. Sarah flinched, then turned away. The group retreated from the gate, moving back into the storm. But Sarah stumbled, fell to her knees in the deep snow. The others tried to help her up, but she waved them off. They hesitated, then continued without her, vanishing into the whiteout. Sarah remained on her knees. Her head bowed. Snow accumulated on her shoulders and back. Minutes passed. The storm intensified. The camera's view grew wider, the details blurring. When the snow cleared momentarily half an hour later, Sarah was still there. A dark shape in the white. Not moving. Frozen. Dead. Just another corpse in the apocalypse. Leo stared at the frozen image on the screen. Sarah, dead outside Marcus's compound. The same fate he'd suffered in his previous life. The circle was complete. The betrayer betrayed. The victim victorious. He should feel something. Vindication. Justice served. Schadenfreude. Or perhaps sadness for a life lost, even a betrayer's life. Some human response to death. For a single, fleeting moment, something stirred in the hollow space inside him. A ghost of an emotion. The faintest echo of grief. Not for Sarah specifically, but for something. For lost connections. For the world that was gone. For the person he used to be, who would have cared about this. The feeling lasted less than a second. Then it was gone. Snuffed out like a candle in the wind. The emptiness returned, deeper than before. Leo reached out and touched the screen where Sarah's frozen body appeared as a pixelated shadow. His finger left no mark on the glass. He closed the footage archive. The screen returned to live feeds, swirling snow, darkness, the impenetrable storm. He glanced at the Paradoxical Inventory interface, still glowing beside him. The humanity index read 79%. 79% human. And falling. The bunker's silence was a living thing, thick and heavy, broken only by the low hum of climate control and the occasional crackle of the security monitors. Leo sat in his command chair, a half-empty glass of 20-year-old scotch at his elbow, his eyes tracing the lines of data on the screens. The outside temperature read -42 degrees Celsius. The wind speed, 85 kilometers per hour. The perimeter sensors showed nothing but the relentless white swirl of the blizzard. For 3 days, since the survivors had come begging and left empty-handed, the world had been a howling void. His humanity index glowed softly in the corner of his vision, 79%. A number that felt increasingly abstract, like a distant weather report. He reached for the glass, his fingers moving with precise, economical grace. The whiskey burned a familiar path down his throat, but the pleasure was muted, a ghost of sensation. He'd retrieved the bottle yesterday, along with a box of Cuban cigars. Each activation of the Paradoxical Inventory had cost him something. The memory of buying the scotch, a celebration after his first promotion, was gone, leaving only the fact of its existence. The scent of the cigar box, once rich with anticipation, now registered as mere data, tobacco, cedar, humidity-controlled preservation. The vault had grown more responsive with each loss. He could now feel the items within it, not as images, but as presences, a warehouse of silent, waiting things in the back of his mind. He'd practiced retrieving small objects from across the room without moving, the items appearing in his hand with a soft, spatial whisper. The power was intoxicating in its efficiency. The cost was a ledger entry somewhere in the fading ledger of his soul. A sharp, metallic clang echoed through the bunker's structure, vibrating up through the reinforced concrete floor. Leo froze, the glass halfway to his lips. His eyes snapped to the security feeds. The exterior cameras showed only blowing snow. The perimeter motion sensors remained silent. But the sound came again, a scraping, grinding noise, followed by a dull thud. It was coming from the northeast quadrant, near the air filtration and ventilation shafts. He set the glass down without a sound and called up the schematic of the bunker's exterior. The ventilation system was a potential weakness, necessary to prevent carbon dioxide buildup, but protected by grated covers and internal baffles. He'd reinforced them with welded steel bars, but against determined, tool-wielding force. Another clang, louder this time. Then a voice, muffled by layers of concrete and snow but sharp with desperation. Here. The grate's loose. Get the crowbar. Leo's heart did not race. His breath did not hitch. A cool, analytical calm settled over him. He switched the northeast exterior camera to thermal imaging. The white-hot blobs of human body heat resolved against the deep blues and purples of the frozen landscape. 5 of them. 6. They were clustered around the ventilation housing, their shapes hunched against the wind. One wielded a long, dark object, a pry bar or pipe. Another had what looked like a sledgehammer. They were dressed in mismatched, bulky clothing, scarves wrapped tight over their faces. Survivors. But not beggars this time. Raiders. They had come from the direction of the small town 20 kilometers down the mountain road. He'd seen its lights wink out on the thermal satellite feed 2 days ago. These were the organized, the desperate, the ones who had decided taking was better than freezing. Asterisk thud. Crack, asterisk. The sound of shearing metal. On the thermal feed, one of the blobs was leveraging the pry bar into the grate's edge. Another swung the sledgehammer. Snow swirled around them, but they worked with a frantic, coordinated energy. Leo's fingers danced across the control panel, bringing up the internal defense systems. He had non-lethal options. Sonic emitters. Tear gas dispensers in the vent shafts. But they were designed for the interior, not the exterior housing. To flood the exterior with gas in this wind would be pointless. The sonic emitters might disorient them, but they required power he was reluctant to divert from the core systems. He needed to scatter them. Quickly, decisively, and with minimal risk to his fortress. A show of overwhelming force that didn't necessitate killing. Killing would attract more attention. It would make him a legend of brutality. It would complicate things. The thought was purely tactical. There was no revulsion at the idea of taking life. There was only a calculation of consequences. The hollow where that revulsion should have been was a quiet, cold space. His mind turned to the paradoxical inventory. He visualized the arsenal section. Rifles, pistols, ammunition crates. And then, in a subcategory labeled less lethal, he saw them, a case of M84 stun grenades. Flashbangs. They would create a devastating burst of light and sound, incapacitating anyone nearby without permanent physical damage. Perfect. He focused on the case, on the act of retrieving a single grenade. The interface of the paradoxical inventory shimmered in his perception, a grid of infinite slots. As he initiated the retrieval, he felt the familiar, insidious pull. It wasn't painful. It was a subtraction. A piece of himself being siphoned away into the vault's boundless depths. This time, it took sound. The memory surfaced for a final, fleeting instant, his father's voice, warm and gravelly, singing an off-key lullaby. Hush, little Leo, don't say a word. The tune, the timbre, the feeling of safety it evoked, it was all there, vivid and whole. Then it was not. It dissolved like smoke in the wind, leaving behind a factual shell, *I had a father. He is dead, *, the emotional resonance, the specific auditory memory, was gone. Erased. Paid. The M84 flashbang grenade materialized in his hand with a soft pop of displaced air. It was cold, cylindrical, heavier than he expected. His humanity index ticked downward in his vision, 78.4%. He felt nothing about the loss. The transaction was complete. On the monitor, the raiders had almost peeled back one corner of the grated cover. Almost through, one yelled, voice raw with cold and triumph. Leo moved to the internal control for the secondary airlock, a small service hatch near the ventilation housing. It was not an entrance, it was a maintenance port, barely a meter wide, sealed with a heavy, manual wheel. He engaged the motorized assist to spin the wheel open just a crack, a few centimeters. Bitter cold and a flurry of snow blasted in. The sound of the storm and the raiders' efforts became immediate and loud. He pulled the pin on the flashbang, let the spoon fly, counted one heartbeat, and shoved the grenade out through the crack. He spun the wheel shut, the motors whining as they resealed the hatch. The detonation was catastrophic in the confined space of the vent housing. Even through the bunker's walls, Leo heard it, a deafening bang that felt like a physical blow to the air, followed by a searing white flash that lit up the thermal camera feed like a miniature sun. The sound of screaming, panicked voices replaced the sounds of tools. He switched the exterior camera back to standard view. The scene was chaos. Raiders were stumbling, falling, clutching their eyes and ears. One had dropped the sledgehammer and was crawling blindly through the snow. Another was vomiting. The pry bar lay abandoned, the vent grate hanging askew but not fully breached. The flashbang had done its job perfectly. Leo watched, his expression impassive. He felt no surge of victory. No relief. No pity for their pain. He observed the data points, threat neutralized, structural integrity maintained, no lethal force required. Efficient. As the raiders began to recover, helping each other up, their movements clumsy and disoriented, a new prompt appeared in his paradoxical inventory interface. Spatial link enhanced. Remote storage protocol available for items within direct line of sight. Range, 50 meters. Activation cost, variable, *. The power had grown again. He could now take things without touching them, if he could see them. The cost would be more of himself. The trade was clear. The raiders were retreating, stumbling back into the blizzard, a broken, shivering group. One of them, a taller figure who had been wielding the pry bar, turned back. He looked directly at the bunker's featureless concrete wall, as if he could sense Leo watching. The man's face, visible for a moment as his scarf slipped, was gaunt, etched with frost and despair. But his eyes, they held a deep, haunting understanding. They weren't just full of pain from the flashbang. They were the eyes of someone who had just glimpsed the impossible, a grenade appearing from nowhere, and recognized it for what it was, the hand of a power beyond their comprehension. They were the eyes of a man who knew he was not just beaten, but utterly, fundamentally outmatched by something inhuman. Leo held that gaze through the camera. A thought, cold and crystalline, formed in the emptiness where his father's lullaby had been. He is a resource. A potential supply. Organic matter. Calories. Labor. He is within line of sight. I could store him. The vault could preserve him. It would cost something. But it would be efficient. One less threat. One more asset, asterisk. The thought was so clean, so logical, it felt inevitable. It lingered, seductive in its simplicity. He could solve this problem permanently, and add to his hoard. The man with the haunted eyes would simply cease to be in this world, and become an entry in the inventory. Leo blinked. He physically shook his head, a sharp, involuntary motion. The thought retreated, but it did not vanish. It coiled in the back of his mind, a new option in his arsenal, a monstrous possibility now acknowledged. The hollow inside him felt deeper, colder, waiting to be filled not with memories, but with things. On the screen, the raider turned and vanished into the white fury of the storm. The bunker was silent once more, save for the hum of machines and the ghost of a thought that would not leave. The bunker's main monitoring station hummed with a low electronic thrum, casting blue light across Leo's impassive face. He sat before a bank of screens, his fingers tracing the edge of the paradoxical inventory interface that hovered in his peripheral vision, a ghostly overlay only he could see. Outside, the wind howled against the reinforced concrete, a constant reminder of the frozen world beyond his walls. For 3 days, he'd been methodically scanning radio frequencies, searching for patterns in the static that might reveal threats. The raiders' attack had been crude, desperate. Something more organized would come eventually. He knew this with the cold certainty of a man who died once already. His eyes moved to the humanity index display, 78.4%. The numbers meant little to him now, just another metric, like temperature readings or ammunition counts. The memory of his father's singing voice was gone, erased when he'd retrieved the flashbang grenade. He tried to recall the melody, any fragment of it, but found only silence where emotion should have been. A faint twinge of something, not loss, but recognition of absence, flickered and died. He dismissed it, turning his attention back to the radio scanner. At 2:17 a.m., the static broke. A voice cut through the white noise, clear and resonant despite the atmospheric interference. It was a man's voice, deep and melodic, speaking with the cadence of a preacher. And the frost is not our enemy, but our salvation. The old world burned with greed and corruption. Now, the ice purifies. It strips away the weak, the hoarders, those who cling to material corruption. We are the chosen, the frost touched. Join us, and embrace the cleansing. Leo leaned forward, his movements precise. He adjusted the frequency, locking onto the signal. The voice continued, describing a divine punishment for humanity's sins, a rebirth through freezing. It spoke of a prophet who had foreseen the apocalypse, who now led the frost cult in gathering the faithful. There were mentions of recruitment centers in abandoned churches, of systematic raids on stockpiles belonging to the greedy. The cult wasn't just surviving, it was organizing, growing. They saw the freeze as holy, and those who resisted it as heretics. For 23 minutes, Leo listened, recording every word. The broadcast repeated every hour on the hour, a scheduled sermon from the cult's leadership. He cross-referenced the signal strength with his maps. It originated from somewhere in the mountain range to the north, likely an old broadcast tower they'd commandeered. His mind worked through scenarios, how many followers they might have, what weapons they could scavenge, whether they knew about his bunker. The thought of being targeted didn't frighten him. Instead, a clinical curiosity stirred. Here was a new variable in the frozen equation. When the broadcast ended, he saved the audio file to a secure drive. The paradoxical inventory interface pulsed softly in his vision, as if sensing his intent. He focused on the encrypted data file, visualizing it not as digital information but as an object to be stored. The interface responded immediately, presenting him with the cost. Activation would drain another fragment of his humanity. He didn't hesitate. A cold sensation spread through his chest, sharp and hollow. It wasn't pain, but an erasure, like a page being torn from a book he could no longer read. This time, it took his capacity for wonder. The childlike awe he'd once felt watching snowflakes fall, the marvel at distant stars, the simple joy of discovering something new, all of it dissolved into nothingness. He blinked, and the world seemed flatter, more mechanical. Colors didn't feel as vivid. The mystery of the Frost cult became just another problem to solve, not a phenomenon to ponder. The data file vanished from his drive, stored perfectly in the Paradoxical Inventory. The interface updated instantly. New functions appeared: direct electronic interfacing, the ability to store and retrieve digital data as easily as physical objects. He could now access the vault's contents through any connected device, and the sensory links had sharpened. He could feel the stored items with greater clarity, almost as if they were extensions of his own body. The power grew as his humanity shrank. A fair trade, he thought without irony. He spent the next hours analyzing the cult's broadcasts. They were methodical. They mentioned cleansing operations against hoarders in the region, promising to redistribute supplies to the faithful. Their rhetoric was dangerous, fanatical, but structured. They had scouts, possibly former military or survivalists. Leo's bunker was well hidden, but not invisible. If they were systematically searching, they'd find it eventually. He stood and walked to the armory section of his bunker, a reinforced room lined with racks of weapons. The Paradoxical Inventory interface followed him, a silent companion. He began retrieving items, cases of ammunition, grenades, tactical gear. Each activation cost him small fragments of empathy, slivers of memory. He lost the recollection of teaching a younger cousin to ride a bike. He forgot the feeling of comfort from a childhood blanket. The humanity index ticked downward: 77.1%, 76.3%, 75.5%. He didn't look at the numbers. They were irrelevant. Instead, he planned. He stored encrypted copies of the cult's broadcasts in multiple vault partitions, creating redundant backups. He interfaced the inventory with his security systems, allowing him to monitor camera feeds through the vault sensory links. He could now see through the bunker's external cameras without looking at the screens, a disconcerting expansion of his awareness that left him feeling both powerful and detached. The world outside became a series of data points, temperature gradients, movement patterns, threat assessments. By dawn, he had fortified his defenses further. He'd stored additional motion sensors around the perimeter, retrieved claymore mines from deep storage, costing him the memory of a summer camping trip, and set up automated turrets at key choke points. The bunker was becoming a fortress within a fortress, each layer of protection paid for with pieces of his soul. He felt no regret, only efficiency. As the first gray light filtered through the bunker's reinforced viewports, the radio crackled to life again. It was the cult's hourly broadcast, but this time, the prophet's voice held a new, sharper edge. The time of cleansing is at hand, the voice declared. We have identified corruption in the eastern mountains. A hoarder, hiding in luxury while the faithful suffer. He thinks his walls will protect him. He is wrong. The frost will judge him. Within 72 hours, we will purify his corruption and reclaim what he has stolen for the glory of the freeze. There was no doubt, they were talking about him. The description matched his location, his setup. They'd been watching, or someone had talked. The raiders from the town, perhaps. Or a survivor who'd seen his lights. It didn't matter. The threat was explicit now. Leo felt a strange sensation as the broadcast ended. Not fear, not anxiety, but a cold, sharp excitement. It spread through him like ice water, tightening his muscles and sharpening his focus. The coming conflict wasn't a disaster to be avoided, it was an opportunity. A chance to test his preparations, to eliminate a threat, to prove his superiority in this frozen world. The cult thought they were purifying. He would show them what true efficiency looked like. He glanced at the humanity index. It had dropped to 70% exactly, a neat, round number that felt significant. 70% of what he'd once been remained, whatever that meant. The rest was gone, traded for power, for survival. He stared at the number for a long moment, then dismissed the interface. The excitement didn't fade. It settled into a calm, deadly certainty. Let them come. He was ready. The wind outside seemed to laugh, or maybe that was just the ice shifting on the mountain. Leo didn't care. He had a war to prepare for. The storm screamed against the bunker's reinforced walls, a relentless white fury that had been raging for 18 hours straight. Leo sat in the command center, his eyes fixed on the bank of monitors that showed the outside world, or what should have shown it. 3 of the 6 external sensor feeds had gone dark 2 hours ago, replaced by static snow that matched the blizzard outside. The remaining cameras showed only swirling white, their lenses caked with ice that the automated wipers couldn't clear fast enough. He'd been watching the temperature readings drop steadily, -42 degrees Celsius, -45 degrees Celsius, -48 degrees Celsius. The wind speed sensors had peaked at 120 km per hour before failing entirely. Without those external eyes, he was blind to approaching threats. The Frost Cult's promised assault was due within 48 hours, and this storm provided perfect cover for an approach. Leo stood, his movements precise and economical. The Paradoxical Inventory interface hovered in his peripheral vision, a translucent overlay that only he could see. His humanity index read 70.0%, a number that meant nothing and everything. He'd stopped trying to remember what the percentage represented in actual human terms weeks ago. The memories were gone anyway. He accessed the vault. The interface responded instantly, smoother than ever before. The electronic interfacing capabilities unlocked in Chapter 7 had integrated the inventory with his security systems, creating a seamless network. He could feel the vault's presence like a second heartbeat, cold and steady. First, he retrieved the advanced cold weather gear. The items materialized before him without fanfare: a heated exoskeleton suit with integrated thermal regulation, polarized goggles with night vision and thermal overlay, insulated boots with magnetic grips for ice, and a breathing apparatus that filtered and warmed the air. Each retrieval cost him something. He felt the subtle erosion like sand slipping through fingers. The memory of choosing this particular gear model vanished completely. He'd purchased it from a specialty survivalist supplier in Denver 3 days before the freeze, paying cash from his liquidated assets. Now he only knew it was his, not why or how. Dressing took 7 minutes. The exoskeleton hummed to life, its micromotors compensating for the added weight. The suit's internal temperature stabilized at 21 degrees Celsius, a pocket of artificial summer against the killing cold outside. He checked the oxygen supply, 4 hours at moderate exertion. More than enough. The airlock cycled with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Leo stepped into the intermediate chamber, then triggered the outer door. The storm hit him like a physical blow. Even through the advanced gear, the cold penetrated. Not the temperature, the suit handled that, but the essence of it, the absolute negation of life. The wind howled with a voice that sounded almost intelligent, shrieking around the bunker's angular surfaces. Snow didn't fall so much as fly horizontally, sharp crystalline needles that clicked against his visor. Leo moved with purpose. The damaged sensors were mounted on retractable poles 20 meters from the bunker entrance. In normal conditions, the walk would take 30 seconds. Today, it might as well have been a kilometer through molasses. His boots crunched through ice that had formed over older snow. The world existed in shades of white and gray, the sky indistinguishable from the ground. He activated the thermal overlay in his goggles. The landscape transformed into a heat map of blues and blacks, no living warmth anywhere. The bunker glowed a soft orange behind him, its geothermal systems maintaining the differential. He reached the first sensor pole. Ice had sheared the mounting bracket, leaving the camera dangling by its cables. The repair should have been simple: remove the damaged bracket, install the replacement from his toolkit, recalibrate. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, but the storm fought him at every turn. The wind tried to tear the tools from his grip. Ice formed on the metal surfaces within seconds of exposure. As he worked on the second sensor, something caught his eye through the swirling snow. A shape, 20 meters to the east, partially buried. He almost ignored it. The logical part of his mind, the part that grew stronger with every percentage point lost, argued that distractions were inefficient. The sensors needed repair. The cult was coming. Time mattered. But something made him look. Leo finished the second repair, then moved toward the shape. His boots sank deeper here, into snowdrifts that had accumulated against a slight rise in the terrain. As he approached, the shape resolved into something human. A child. Small, curled in the fetal position, wrapped in a blue parka that had frosted white. The face was turned away, buried partially in snow. One mittened hand reached out as if grasping for something no longer there. Leo stood over the body. The thermal overlay showed no heat signature, just the same deep blue as the surrounding ice. Dead for days, maybe weeks. Frozen perfectly, preserved by the endless cold. And then it happened. A memory surfaced, unbidden and complete. Her name was, no, wait, it's *summer. July. He was 9, she was 6. They were in the backyard sprinkler, the water cool against sun-warmed skin. She laughed, a high, bright sound that carried across the lawn. He remembered the exact pattern of freckles across her nose, the way her hair stuck to her forehead when wet, the gap where she'd lost a front tooth. She'd called him Leo Lee, a nickname only she used. He'd carried her on his shoulders later that day, her small hands gripping his hair, her trust absolute, *. His sister. The memory lasted 3 heartbeats. In that span, Leo felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks, genuine emotion. Not the cold excitement of impending conflict, not the detached satisfaction of a well-executed plan, but actual human grief. A pang of loss so sharp it felt physical, a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with the cold. She died before the freeze. Leukemia. He'd been at her bedside when. No. The memory was already fading, slipping away like water through cracks. He grasped for it, trying to hold on to the feeling, the sound of her laugh, the *. What was her name? The storm intensified. Wind screamed, and the temperature dropped again. Leo's suit alarms triggered, external temperature reading -52 degrees Celsius, approaching the gear's operational limits. The exoskeleton motor strained against the cold. His oxygen supply dropped faster than projected, the system was working overtime to heat the air. He needed to get back inside. Now. But the snow had deepened around him. The drifts reached his thighs in places. The walk back to the bunker, against the wind, would take 10 minutes at this rate. His suit might not last that long. The temperature differential between his body and the environment was becoming unsustainable. He looked at the frozen child again. At his sister, no, at the child. The memory was almost gone now. Just an echo of feeling, like a photograph fading to blank paper. An idea formed. Cold. Logical. Perfect. The paradoxical inventory could store anything within his direct line of sight. He'd proven that with the raiders in Chapter 6, with the temptation to store a living person as supply. This was simpler. This was just ice. But not just ice. The storm itself. Leo raised his hands, though the gesture wasn't necessary. The interface responded to thought, not motion. He focused on the swirling snow around him, on the ice particles that flew like shrapnel, on the very essence of the storm in his immediate vicinity. Store. The effect was instantaneous and profound. For a radius of 5 meters around him, the storm ceased. Snow hung motionless in the air, then vanished. The wind still howled beyond the bubble, but within it, there was perfect stillness. The temperature didn't rise, the cold was too entrenched, but the wind chill vanished. The assault stopped. And Leo felt the cost. The memory of his sister disappeared completely. Not just faded. Not just difficult to recall. Gone. Erased. As if it had never existed. He knew, intellectually, that he'd had a sister. The facts remained: younger sibling, died young, leukemia. But the personal connection, the emotional weight, the specific sensory details, all vanished. The nickname Leo Lee meant nothing now. The pattern of freckles was blank. The sound of her laugh was silence. In its place, the paradoxical inventory expanded. A notification appeared in his interface: cryopreservation abilities unlocked. Items stored may now be preserved at absolute zero conditions indefinitely. Biological samples maintain viability, *. The vault had absorbed not just the physical ice, but the concept of preservation through cold. It understood freezing now, at a fundamental level. Leo didn't linger on the loss. The bubble of calm wouldn't last. Already, snow was beginning to drift back into the vacuum. He turned and walked toward the bunker, his path easier now without the direct wind resistance. He didn't look back at the child's body. Inside the airlock, as the chamber repressurized, he removed his helmet. His face felt numb, though the suit said his skin temperature was normal. He stared at his reflection in the polished metal of the inner door. The man who looked back was familiar and alien. Same features, same eyes. But something behind those eyes had changed again. Dimmed. Simplified. He cycled through the airlock and returned to the command center. The newly repaired sensors came online one by one, showing clear feeds of the storm-ravaged landscape. He ran diagnostics, all systems functional, lenses clear, thermal imaging operational. He sat before the monitors, pulling up the recorded footage from the last hour. He wanted to see if the storm calm had registered, if the temporary vacuum had created any visible anomaly. The footage showed his exit, the repairs, his approach to the child's body. He watched himself stand there for exactly 47 seconds. He watched the moment when the storm around him suddenly stilled, creating that perfect bubble of calm. He watched himself turn and walk back. Then he let the footage continue playing in real time, scanning the perimeter. At the edge of the camera's range, at the maximum zoom, movement. Leo leaned forward, enhancing the image. The thermal overlay showed heat signatures, multiple ones. Human shapes, moving with purpose through the storm. They wore white camouflage that blended with the snow, but their body heat gave them away. He counted, 12, 15, 20. More emerging from the white. And at their head, a larger figure. A man whose thermal signature burned hotter than the others, as if fueled by something beyond normal metabolism. The figure turned, looking directly toward the camera, or seeming to, through the storm and distance. The enhancement resolved the face. Marcus. But not the Marcus from Leo's memories. This man's eyes burned with fanatic intensity. Icicles hung from his beard like ritual adornments. He carried a staff topped with what looked like frozen flesh, a twisted, preserved thing that glowed faintly blue in the thermal spectrum. Around his neck hung symbols carved from ice that shouldn't have survived the wind. The warlord had become something else. A zealot. A prophet of the frost. And he was leading the cult directly toward Leo's bunker, a day ahead of schedule. The storm hadn't been a coincidence. It had been cover. And Leo had just given them a perfect window by calming the weather around his position, creating a visible anomaly in the blizzard. On the monitor, Marcus raised his ice staff, pointing it toward the bunker. His mouth moved, speaking words the microphones couldn't capture through the wind. But Leo didn't need to hear them. He understood. The final repair was complete. The sensors worked perfectly. And they showed death approaching, led by a ghost from a past life that Leo could barely remember. His humanity index ticked downward, 68.3%. The sister's memory had been worth 1.7%. A fair trade for cryopreservation abilities. A logical exchange. Leo's hands rested on the console, steady. The cold excitement returned, sharper now. The cult was here. Marcus was here. The conflict had arrived. He began accessing the inventory, retrieving weapons, preparing defenses. Each activation cost him something small, a minor preference, a forgotten taste, a faded emotion. He didn't notice the losses anymore. They were just numbers, percentages, data points. Outside, the storm raged on. But within the bunker, within Leo, a deeper cold was settling in. Permanent. Absolute. And waiting. The first impact came at dawn, a shuddering thud against the bunker's northern blast door that echoed through reinforced concrete like a funeral drum. Leo stood motionless in the control room, his eyes fixed on the thermal imaging display. Outside, the world was a monochrome hellscape of white snow and gray sky, but the screens showed a different reality, dozens of heat signatures clustered around his fortress, human-shaped blobs of orange and yellow against the deep blue cold. He'd been monitoring them for hours. The frost cult moved with eerie coordination, their white thermal suits making them near invisible to conventional optics but glaringly obvious to infrared. They'd encircled the bunker's main entrance and ventilation shafts, setting up positions with military precision. Leo counted 37 signatures. More than he'd anticipated. A second impact, this time against the eastern airlock. The sound was sharper, metallic, thermal lances, he realized. Tools designed to melt through steel by superheating small points to thousands of degrees. They'd learned from the failed raider attack. They'd come prepared. The comms crackled to life. A voice Leo hadn't heard in 2 lifetimes, yet one his body remembered with visceral clarity. Little Leo in his fancy icebox. Marcus's voice was rougher than Leo remembered, raspy with cold or fanaticism or both. You think your walls can keep out judgment? The freeze purifies all things. Even traitors. Leo's fingers didn't tremble as they hovered over the control panel. He felt nothing at the sound of that voice, no anger, no fear, no remembered betrayal. Just data. Marcus, former warlord, now frost zealot. Threat level, high. Priority target. I remember you begging at my gates, Marcus continued. Static distorted his words, but the malice came through clean. Fingers black with frostbite. Eyes empty. You died well, Leo. You should have stayed dead. On screen, the cultists began their assault in earnest. Thermal lances glowed cherry red against bunker steel, their operators working in pairs, one holding the lance steady, another feeding it power from portable generators. Steam erupted where superheated metal met frozen air, creating swirling vortices of mist that obscured the cameras. Leo accessed the Paradoxical Inventory interface. The familiar blue holographic display materialized before him, showing his hoard in meticulous categories: weapons, defenses, supplies, luxuries. His eyes flicked to the humanity index in the corner, 68.3%. The number meant nothing emotionally, but he understood its tactical implications. Lower numbers meant greater power. Greater detachment. He selected automated defense turrets from the weapons category. The system prompted for confirmation, displaying the cost, memory of kindness from a stranger. Leo hesitated for exactly 1.7 seconds. He searched his mind for the memory. A vague impression of rain, someone holding an umbrella over him, a warm voice saying, nothing. The details were already gone, eroded by previous activations. All that remained was the knowledge that such a memory had once existed. He confirmed the transaction. The world didn't change. No flash of light, no sudden emptiness. The memory simply ceased to be, leaving behind only the fact of its absence. The humanity index ticked down to 65.1%. Simultaneously, 4 turrets materialized in pre-designated defensive positions around the bunker exterior. They were sleek, black things with multiple barrels and independent targeting systems. Leo felt a new connection form in his mind, a neural link to the turret's control systems. The Paradoxical Inventory's combat integration feature, unlocked through repeated use and human cost. He didn't need screens or controls anymore. He could see through the turret sensors directly, a disorienting quad view of the assault. He could feel their ammunition counts, their power levels, their targeting solutions. The turrets were extensions of his will. Leo fired. The northernmost turret spun with hydraulic smoothness and unleashed a burst of armor-piercing rounds. The sound was deafening even through bunker walls, a staccato roar that echoed across the frozen valley. 2 cultists operating a thermal lance disintegrated in a spray of red against white snow. Their heat signatures vanished from thermal imaging. Chaos erupted among the cultists. They scattered, taking cover behind rock formations and snowdrifts. But they didn't retreat. They chanted instead, their voices rising in unison, a low, guttural hymn to the cold. The freeze provides. The freeze cleanses. Marcus's laughter crackled over comms. Still fighting, Leo? Still pretending you're human? I can see your turrets. Nice toys. But toys break. On the eastern flank, cultists produced shaped charges. They moved with frantic speed, placing explosives against the bunker's weaker points, service hatches, sensor arrays, power conduits. Leo tracked them through turret sensors, picking off 3 before they could retreat. Their bodies fell in awkward positions, blood melting small circles in the snow. He felt nothing watching them die. No satisfaction, no guilt. Just efficiency metrics: 3 hostiles neutralized, ammunition consumption 12%, threat reduction 8%. The shaped charges detonated. The bunker shook violently. Alarms blared in the control room, structural integrity alerts, pressure warnings, breach detection. Dust sifted from the ceiling. On the eastern camera feed, Leo saw a service hatch blown inward, its steel door twisted into abstract sculpture. Cold air rushed in, frosting the interior corridor visible through the opening. Cultists surged toward the breach. They moved in coordinated teams, covering each other with crude firearms. Leo counted 12 making for the opening. He accessed the inventory again. Selected incendiary grenades. The cost, capacity for regret. He confirmed without hesitation. The humanity index dropped to 62.4%. 3 grenades materialized in the breached corridor. Leo triggered them remotely through his neural link. The explosion was contained but devastating. Fire bloomed in the confined space, consuming oxygen and flesh alike. Screams echoed briefly before being cut off. The heat signatures of the 12 cultists vanished, replaced by a spreading pool of liquid fire that melted snow and flesh together. But more were coming. The cult seemed endless, emerging from the tree line with fresh thermal lances, more explosives, fanatical determination. They weren't raiders seeking supplies. They were true believers seeking martyrdom. Leo monitored the battle through his expanding network of senses. The turrets were running low on ammunition. 2 had suffered damage from cultist firearms. The neural link gave him real-time damage reports, cracked housing on turret B, jammed rotation mechanism on turret D. He retreated deeper into the bunker, moving through reinforced corridors toward the armory. His footsteps echoed in the sterile silence, a counterpoint to the muffled explosions outside. The air grew colder as he approached the breached section, he could feel the temperature drop through his environmental sensors. In the armory, he faced his most powerful weapons, stored safely away from the fighting. His eyes settled on a prototype he'd acquired during his hoarding frenzy, a directed energy weapon based on experimental military research. It looked like an oversized rifle with complex cooling systems and power cells the size of bricks. The Paradoxical Inventory interface appeared unbidden. It highlighted the weapon, displaying its capabilities, armor penetration, area denial, psychological impact. And the cost. Remaining fear of death. Leo stared at the words. He searched within himself for that fear. The primal terror that had driven him through his first life, that had fueled his desperate preparations in this one. He found, calculations. Statistical probabilities of survival. Tactical advantages. But no fear. The emotion had been eroding for weeks, activation by activation. What remained was the knowledge that fear had once existed. The memory of being afraid. Not the feeling itself. He reached for the weapon. His hand closed around a cold grip. The transaction completed. The world didn't end. His heart didn't stop. But something fundamental shifted in his perception. Mortality became an abstract concept, a variable in an equation, not a looming abyss. The certainty of his own eventual death became data, not dread. The humanity index plummeted. Numbers cascaded downward, 60%. 58%. 56%. It settled at 55%. Leo hefted the energy weapon. It was heavier than he remembered. He checked the power cell, fully charged. The cooling systems hummed with readiness. Through his neural link to the turrets, he saw cultists finally breaching the outer layer in force. They poured through multiple openings now, their white suits stained with blood and soot. Marcus was among them, larger than the others, wielding a thermal lance like a scepter. Leo moved toward the inner defenses. His face felt strange. Muscles pulling in unfamiliar patterns. He realized he was grinning. Not with joy. Not with triumph. Not with any human emotion at all. It was the expression of pure, cold calculation, the smile of a system optimizing itself for maximum efficiency. The hollow monster within had found its perfect weapon, and for the first time, it showed its teeth. The explosion still echoed in Leo's ears as he stumbled backward into the bunker's deeper tunnels. Smoke and frost swirled in the breached entryway behind him, the acrid scent of melted metal and burnt insulation mixing with the sterile cold of the mountain's heart. His boots crunched on scattered items, a can of peaches rolled against the wall, a medical kit lay spilled open, bandages unfurling like pale tongues on the concrete floor. The hoard, once meticulously organized in his paradoxical inventory, now lay in disarray around him, physical reminders of what he'd stored at such cost. He pressed his back against the rough-hewn rock wall, the cold seeping through his thermal suit. The vault's interface flickered in his peripheral vision, a constant companion that felt more alien with each activation. Humanity Index, 55%. The numbers glowed with clinical detachment. He remembered when they'd meant something, when the drop from 70% to 68.3% had made his chest tighten with the loss of his sister's memory. Now, he merely noted the figure as data. Voices echoed from the breached chamber behind him. Cultists. Their words were distorted by the tunnels, but he caught fragments: cleansing, the hoarder, the prophet's will. Marcus was among them. Leo could almost picture the warlord's face, transformed by frost zealotry, eyes burning with the same fanaticism that had left Leo to freeze in another life. But the image brought no heat, no surge of vengeance. Just calculation. He moved deeper into the tunnels, his headlamp cutting a narrow beam through the darkness. The passages were a maze carved into the mountain decades ago, part of the bunker's original Cold War design. Pipes lined the ceiling, dripping condensation that froze into jagged icicles. His breath fogged in the air, each exhale a brief cloud that vanished into the gloom. The floor was uneven, littered with loose rocks that had shaken free during the assault. He nearly tripped over one, catching himself against the wall. His gloves came away damp with icy moisture. Ahead, the tunnel branched. Left or right? He paused, listening. Footsteps to the left, multiple, heavy boots on concrete. To the right, silence. He chose right, moving with deliberate quiet. The paradoxical inventory hummed at the edge of his awareness, a presence that felt both part of him and utterly separate. He could sense its capabilities like extensions of his own mind: remote storage for items within line of sight, electronic interfacing with the bunker's failing systems, cryopreservation waiting to be used. And the cost, always the cost. He rounded a corner and froze. A section of the ceiling had partially collapsed, creating a treacherous slope of loose rocks and ice. Beyond it, the tunnel continued, but crossing would make noise the cultists would hear. Leo stared at the hazard, his mind working. He could go back, risk the other branch. Or. He activated the paradoxical inventory. The interface materialized before him, translucent blue lines outlining the loose rocks and icy patches. A prompt appeared: store environmental hazard. Cost, capacity for fear. Leo didn't hesitate. Fear had already left him when he'd retrieved the energy weapon, when his humanity index had plummeted to 55%. What was one more loss? He focused, and the rocks vanished into the vault's infinite space. The icy patches followed, leaving the floor clear and dry. The process was silent, effortless. But the cost wasn't. A coldness settled in his chest, deeper than the mountain's chill. He tried to remember what fear felt like: the racing heart, the tightness in his throat, the instinct to flee. Nothing. The memory of being afraid was there, intellectually. He knew he'd once trembled at the thought of the freeze, once felt genuine terror when Marcus betrayed him. But the emotion itself was gone, scraped away like frost from a window. His humanity index ticked down, 54.1%. He crossed the now clear section, his footsteps echoing faintly. The vault seemed to pulse with satisfaction, its power growing. New data streamed into his awareness: adaptations. It could now store living matter. Briefly. Experimental parameters flashed: organic material, up to 30 seconds, significant humanity cost. Leo's lips twitched in something that wasn't a smile. He could store a cultist. Test the limits. See what the vault would give in return. The thought came without revulsion, without ethical hesitation. Just curiosity. He pushed it aside for now. Survival first. He reached a junction where 3 tunnels converged, a small chamber with rusted lockers along one wall. This was where he'd stored excess supplies before the assault: crates of ammunition, fuel canisters, non-perishable food. Now, some of it lay scattered, kicked open by fleeing or searching. He could use this. Setting traps required focus, a kind of mechanical creativity that felt increasingly natural. He used the Paradoxical Inventory's remote storage capability to reposition items without touching them. A tripwire made from unraveled bandages, connected to a stack of loose metal pipes. A pressure plate rigged with spare ammunition that would clatter like an alarm if stepped on. He worked quickly, his movements precise. Each minor activation cost him nothing new. The vault seemed to consider this within existing parameters, no additional humanity drained. But he could feel it watching, waiting for the next substantial payment. As he finished the last trap, he heard voices again, closer. They were searching methodically, fanning out through the tunnels. He slipped into the leftmost passage, his headlamp off now, navigating by memory and a faint glow of emergency lights that still flickered in places. The cold was a constant presence, seeping through every layer. He passed a side room, its door ajar. Inside, a wounded cultist lay against the wall, clutching a bleeding leg. The man's breath came in ragged gasps, his eyes wide with pain and fear. Leo paused. The cultist hadn't seen him yet. He could store him. Test the vault's new capability. The cost would be high, the interface suggested a drop to 50% or lower, but what would he gain? Enhanced sensory links. Longer storage duration. The vault seemed eager, its presence pressing against his mind. He took a step forward. The cultist looked up, his face pale in the dim light. "Please," the man whispered, his voice trembling. "Don't." Leo stared at him. The plea meant nothing. No pity stirred in his chest. No empathy. Those were gone, paid for cans of beans and encrypted data and automated turrets. He raised a hand, the paradoxical interface activating. Blue lines outlined the cultist's shivering form. Then he stopped. Not out of mercy. Out of practicality. The storage might alert others. The energy signature could be detected. And the humanity cost, he needed to preserve some functionality. He let his hand fall. The cultist slumped in relief, but Leo was already moving on, leaving the man to his fate. The decision felt clean, efficient. No regret. That too was gone. He evaded 2 more patrols by using the tunnel's acoustics, letting their footsteps guide him away. At one point, he passed a mural painted on the rock, a faded image of mountains under a blue sky, some long-dead artist's attempt to beautify this subterranean prison. Leo felt nothing looking at it. No longing for the world above, no appreciation for art. Just a tactical assessment, the paint could be scraped for chemicals if needed. Finally, he reached a storage room near the bunker's core. This was where he kept the luxury items, things he'd hoarded not for survival but for the act of hoarding itself. Fine wines, imported chocolates, silk sheets. The door was reinforced steel, but it stood slightly open. Light spilled from within. He approached silently, peering through the gap. Marcus stood inside, his back to the door. The warlord wore frost-crusted robes, a thermal lance slung across his back. He was examining a crate of champagne, his gloved fingers tracing the labels. The room was lined with shelves, all stocked with excess, a physical manifestation of Leo's hoard, things he hadn't bothered to store in the vault because they weren't essential. Because storing them would have cost humanity for mere indulgence. Leo pushed the door open. The hinges creaked. Marcus spun, his hand going to his weapon. Then he froze, recognition dawning in his eyes. Leo. Leo stepped inside, the door swinging shut behind him. The room was warmer than the tunnels, heated by a portable unit in the corner. The air smelled of dust and old wood. He said nothing, just watched Marcus. Marcus lowered his hand slowly. "I didn't think you'd make it this far. The breach, we thought you were trapped in the outer layers." "You thought wrong," Leo said. His voice was flat, devoid of inflection. Marcus took a step forward, then stopped as Leo didn't react. No fear, no aggression. Just, observation. "Look at you," Marcus said, his voice softening with something that might have been pity in another life. "I remember you from before. Begging at my bunker gate. You had fire in your eyes then. Rage. Now, you're just empty." Leo tilted his head. "Efficiency is not emptiness." "Is that what you call it?" Marcus gestured around the room. "All this. Hoarding like a dragon while the world freezes. Do you even know why anymore?" Survival. Survival? Marcus laughed, a harsh sound. You're not surviving, Leo. You're just, storing. Like your vault. You've become it. He took another step, his hands open in a placating gesture. We were friends once. Before the freeze in that other life you claimed to remember. We worked together. Shared supplies. You trusted me. Leo's mind searched for the memory. Fragments surfaced, a handshake, a shared meal, laughter over a campfire. But they were data points, not experiences. No warmth accompanied them. No sense of betrayal. Just facts. You left me to die, he said. I had to. Marcus's voice rose, edged with desperation. Resources were scarce. The cult was rising. I made a choice to save my people. It was never personal. It was personal to me, Leo said. But even as he spoke the words, he felt nothing. No anger. No hurt. Just the cold calculation of a threat that needed neutralizing. Marcus must have seen it in his eyes. The warlord's expression shifted from pleading to something harder. You can't even feel it, can you? What I did. What you've lost. The prophet warned us about hoarders like you. Said you trade your souls for things. I didn't believe it until now. Leo activated the Paradoxical Inventory interface. Blue lines outlined Marcus, the room, the items on the shelves. Options presented themselves: store the warlord, living matter, experimental, high cost; store the thermal lance, remote retrieval, minimal cost; store the entire room, mass storage, catastrophic humanity loss. He considered each dispassionately. Marcus saw the interface glow reflected in Leo's eyes. He took a step back, real fear now in his own face. Don't. Please. We can work together again. The cult has resources. Knowledge about the freeze. You have the hoard. We could. No, Leo said. He didn't choose to store Marcus. Not yet. Instead, he used the vault's combat integration, mentally activating the security protocols he'd linked to the bunker's systems. The door locked with a heavy clunk. The portable heater shut off. The lights dimmed, leaving only the glow of the paradoxical interface. Marcus raised his thermal lance, but his hands were shaking. Leo, think about what you're doing. Who you were. Your mother, you told me about her laughter. Remember? Leo searched his memories. The vault had taken that one early, paid for canned goods. He remembered knowing he'd had a mother. Remembered knowing she'd laughed. But the sound was gone. The feeling was gone. No, he said simply. Marcus's face fell. He lowered the lance. Then there's nothing left to save. Leo advanced, the interface humming. His humanity index ticked down, 48%. The number glowed, a final testament to what he'd paid. He felt nothing looking at it. Nothing looking at Marcus. Nothing at all. The luxury storage room smelled of polished wood and cold metal, a stark contrast to the desperation in Marcus's eyes. Leo stood before him, the prototype energy weapon humming softly in his grip. Around them, shelves gleamed with preserved foods, medical supplies, and gold bars, a testament to the hoard that had brought them both to this moment. Marcus's breath fogged in the chilled air. He wore the tattered robes of the frost cult, frostbite creeping up his fingers, but his gaze held a fanatic's fire. You think you've won, Leo? You're just another hoarder to be sacrificed. The ice demands it, it hungers for souls like yours, swollen with greed. Leo felt nothing at the words. No anger, no fear, not even the cold satisfaction of revenge he'd once imagined. The void where emotions should reside was a silent, yawning space. His humanity index hovered at 48%, a number that meant less with each passing second. Sacrifice, he asked, his voice flat. Your cult's delusions don't interest me. Marcus laughed, a brittle sound that echoed off the steel walls. Delusions? We've seen the truth in the freeze. The world didn't just grow cold, it awakened. And it craves those who stockpile life while others die. Your paradoxical inventory, it's a beacon. We've tracked its energy signatures for weeks. Every time you stored a can, a weapon, a memory, you called to us. Leo's fingers tightened on the weapon. Remote storage capability tingled at the edge of his awareness. He could store items within direct line of sight, but Marcus was a living threat, not an object. The vault's adaptation to store living matter whispered possibilities, but he pushed it aside. Too risky. You came for my hoard, Leo stated. Not some cosmic ritual. Both, Marcus hissed, taking a step forward. The room was cramped, barely 10 feet across, with shelves lining every wall. The hoard is the offering. Your soul, drained by that cursed power, is the key. We'll use it to appease the ice, to become its chosen. And you'll be empty long before we're done. A memory flickered, or the ghost of one. Leo's mind grasped for something, anything, his mother's laugh, his sister's smile, the warmth of a friend's hand. But there was only static. The paradoxical inventory had taken it all, payment for survival. He glanced at the shelves. Automated turret deployment systems were offline here, but his combat integration allowed mental control of defenses elsewhere. Useless in this close quarters. Marcus lunged, a thermal lance glowing in his hand. Leo sidestepped, the energy weapon firing a searing bolt that grazed Marcus's shoulder. The smell of burnt cloth and flesh filled the air. Marcus staggered, but didn't cry out. Fanaticism had numbed him too. You don't remember, do you? Marcus panted, circling. Before the freeze, we shared a drink. You talked about saving the world. Now look at you, a monster in a bunker, trading humanity for canned beans. Leo's expression didn't change. He'd lost the capacity for regret in Chapter 9, along with his fear of death. These words were just noise. But a tactical assessment ran cold and clear. Marcus was stronger, fueled by belief, and the confined space limited mobility. Leo needed an advantage, something immediate. His eyes scanned the room. The air, thin, cold, but present. The paradoxical inventory interface glowed in his mind's eye, offering options. Remote storage for items within direct line of sight. But air wasn't an item, it was a medium. Yet, the vault had grown more powerful with each activation, unlocking cryopreservation, combat integration, living matter storage. Could it manipulate space itself? Marcus charged again, lance aimed for Leo's chest. Leo didn't dodge. Instead, he focused. The inventory activated, targeting not an object, but the volume of air surrounding Marcus. A cost flashed, unseen, but felt in the core of his being. Something tore loose, a final, fragile thread. The air vanished. One moment, Marcus was mid-lunge, the next, he was gasping in a vacuum, his eyes bulging. Sound died, the room fell into eerie silence. Leo watched, detached, as Marcus clawed at his throat, the thermal lance clattering to the floor. The vault's power surged, spatial manipulation rippling through the room, shelves seemed to warp slightly, light bending at the edges. And Leo paid. The capacity for love, not a memory, but the very ability to feel it, dissolved like mist. He'd never loved Marcus, but he'd loved others once, his family, friends, perhaps even a fleeting romance. Now, that potential was gone, erased from his soul. The humanity index ticked down, 45%, 42%, settling at 40%. A coldness seeped into his bones, deeper than the freeze outside. Marcus collapsed, twitching, frost crystallizing on his skin as the room's cold rushed into the vacuum. Leo deactivated the storage, air rushing back with a soft whoosh. He stood over Marcus, who lay frozen, breath shallow, eyes glazing over. The ice will take you, Marcus whispered, his voice a rasp. Leo raised the energy weapon. It already has, he said, and fired. The bolt struck true, leaving a charred hole in Marcus's chest. Silence returned, broken only by the hum of the bunker's systems. Victory. Leo waited for something, triumph, relief, even sorrow. But there was only void. He stared at Marcus's body, the warlord who'd betrayed him in a past life, now dead by his hand. No emotion stirred. The hoard around him seemed to mock him, mountains of supplies, endless wealth, all bought with pieces of himself. He'd outsmarted the external threat, but the internal one had grown vast and hungry. Then, a flash in his mind. The paradoxical inventory interface shimmered, red text scrolling across his vision, threshold breached, monstrous evolution available. The words hung there, cold and inviting. Leo didn't feel curiosity or dread, just a hollow acknowledgement. The power that had saved him was now offering to remake him entirely, and he had nothing left to refuse with. The silence after battle was thicker than the bunker's reinforced walls. Leo stood in the luxury storage room, Marcus's body cooling on the polished concrete floor beside crates of vintage wine and climate-controlled art displays. The air still crackled with residual energy from the prototype weapon, ozone mixing with the coppery scent of blood. He didn't look at the corpse. His eyes tracked instead to the scattered cultist gear, thermal lances, frost-encrusted armor, strange amulets carved from blue ice. He knelt, his movements precise and economical. No wasted motion. His gloved hand reached for the nearest thermal lance, its metal casing still warm from recent use. The paradoxical inventory interface shimmered at the edge of his vision, a familiar ghostly overlay he no longer needed to consciously summon. It had become as natural as breathing, perhaps more so. Breathing still required lungs, while the vault required only will. Storage activation. The lance vanished. No sound, no flash. One moment it rested against concrete, the next it existed only in the extra-dimensional space that had grown to contain mountains of supplies. Leo felt the familiar drain, but different now, less a tearing, more a gentle erosion, like sand slipping through fingers he could no longer feel closing. Something dissolved. He paused, waiting for the memory to surface. Before, each loss had been accompanied by phantom sensations, his mother's voice, the warmth of a handshake, the taste of fear. Now there was only emptiness where something had been. He accessed the Humanity Index tracking system. The numbers ticked down, 39.8%. The system didn't specify what he'd lost this time. It didn't need to. He knew. It had been the sunset. The one from that camping trip years before the freeze, back when friends meant something more than tactical assets or betrayers. Sarah had been there, laughing as she tried to light a fire with damp wood. Someone, he couldn't remember who now, had brought a guitar. The colors had been spectacular, oranges and purples bleeding across the sky as the temperature dropped and they'd huddled closer for warmth. He could almost recall the feeling of contentment, of belonging. Almost. Gone. Leo stood and moved to the next item. A cultist's frost amulet, intricate carvings depicting spiraling ice patterns. He stored it. 39.5%. Another amulet. 39.2%. A damaged thermal lance. 38.9%. He worked methodically, clearing the room of everything not bolted down. Each activation felt smoother than the last, the vault responding with eager efficiency. New options flickered at the edge of his consciousness, reality-warping storage protocols, spatial folding suggestions, matter-to-energy conversion queries. The system was evolving, adapting to his diminished humanity, offering greater power in exchange for what little remained. When the storage room was clean, he moved through the bunker's corridors. The Frost cult's assault had left scars, scorch marks on walls where incendiary grenades had detonated, frozen blood splatters where turrets had found their marks, the occasional body still sprawled where it had fallen. Leo stepped over them without looking down. His boots made soft clicks on the concrete, the only sound in the pressurized silence. He reached the command center. The monitors showed the external cameras, a frozen wasteland stretching to the horizon, the sky perpetually gray with the threat of more snow. No movement. No heat signatures. The cult's forces had been thorough in their assault, and now they were gone. Neutralized. Leo sat in a command chair, its leather creaking. He brought up inventory logs. The horde had grown substantially during the conflict, weapons captured from cultists, their specialized cold weather gear, even some of their rations. He'd stored it all automatically during the fighting, paying in fragments of self he could no longer name. The vault now contained enough supplies to sustain a small city for decades. Food, water, fuel, medicine, weapons, luxury goods, raw materials. Everything a person could need to survive the Ice Age. Everything except warmth. He felt the cold inside more acutely than any external temperature. The bunker's climate control maintained a perfect 72 degrees Fahrenheit, but Leo shivered anyway. Not from fear, that was gone, sacrificed somewhere around 54%, but from absence. The hollow space where emotion should have been echoed with every heartbeat. A system alert flashed. Asterisk regional threat assessment, Warlord Marcus eliminated. Frost cult cell neutralized. Immediate perimeter secure, asterisk. Leo dismissed it. The words meant nothing. Victory meant nothing. He had what he wanted, safety, supplies, a fortress against the frozen world. And yet. He stood and walked to the bunker's main living quarters. The luxury here was almost obscene, a king-sized bed with silk sheets, a fully stocked bar with bottles older than he was, an entertainment system with every movie and game ever digitized. He'd stored it all in the frantic week before the freeze, paying with memories of birthdays, with the ability to feel joy at simple pleasures, with connections to people whose faces he could no longer recall. His reflection caught in the polished surface of a stainless steel appliance. He stopped and looked. The man staring back was a stranger. Lean where he'd once been soft, eyes that held no light, face set in lines of permanent calculation. He tried to remember what he'd looked like before. The memory wouldn't come. That too was likely stored somewhere, traded for canned goods or ammunition. He turned away and returned to the storage areas. There was still work to do. The cult had brought supplies with them, sleds loaded with equipment, portable shelters, communication devices. All of it needed to be secured. All of it represented potential advantages. He spent hours methodically clearing the bunker's exterior approaches. The cold bit at exposed skin, but he barely noticed. His environmental suit, pulled from the vault with a thought, kept him functional. Each storage activation felt easier than the last. The vault was hungry, eager, offering new capabilities with every item consumed. Spatial manipulation protocols now allowed him to store objects from greater distances, to retrieve them with pinpoint accuracy, to fold space around threats. He tested it by storing a patch of ice from 30 feet away. It vanished instantly. 38.4%. What had he lost that time? The ability to appreciate beauty? The memory of his first kiss? The concept of trust? The system didn't say, and he found he didn't care to ask. As dusk approached, the days were growing shorter as the freeze deepened, he found the final item. It was in Marcus's personal effects, recovered from the warlord's body. A relic, unlike the other cult items. Not ice, but obsidian, black as void, carved into twisting shapes that hurt to look at for too long. It felt warm to the touch, which was impossible in the frozen air. Leo held it up, studying it in the bunker's exterior lights. The carvings seemed to shift when not observed directly, patterns swimming just below the surface. Cult prophecies, Marcus had called them. Whispers of greater dangers beyond the regional threats. Something about the freeze being not an end, but a beginning. About ancient things sleeping in the ice, waiting to be awakened by sufficient sacrifice. He almost stored it immediately. The vault wanted it, he could feel the pull, the system's interest in an object of such anomalous properties. But something stopped him. Not emotion, that ship had sailed long ago, but calculation. The relic represented information. Potential advantage. Unknown variables. He brought it inside, to the command center. Placed it on the console beside the main monitor. The obsidian seemed to drink the light around it, creating a pool of deeper darkness on the polished surface. Storage activation recommended, the system prompted. Asterisk anomalous object classification, unknown. Potential for vault evolution, high. Cost assessment, moderate to high humanity expenditure, asterisk. Leo reached for it. His hand hovered over the relic. And the vault whispered. It wasn't sound, not exactly. More a thought that wasn't his own, echoing in the hollow spaces of his mind. The voice used his mental patterns, his vocabulary, but the tone was all wrong, cold where he was empty, hungry where he was indifferent, monstrous in its certainty. Store this, it suggested. Asterisk and store what remains of your compassion. The final fragment. Trade it for ultimate power. Become the perfect guardian of the hoard. Become the Hollow King, asterisk. Leo froze. His hand didn't tremble, he'd lost the capacity for nervousness weeks ago, but it didn't complete the motion either. He looked from the relic to his reflection in the dark monitor screen. The eyes that stared back were completely empty. Not just devoid of emotion, but of self. Windows to a void that had consumed everything he'd once been. The ultimate internal enemy wasn't knocking at the gate anymore. It was already inside, wearing his face, speaking with his voice, offering him everything he'd ever wanted in exchange for the one thing he had left. He hesitated. The vault waited, patient as the ice outside. The relic pulsed with warm darkness. And in the silence of the secured bunker, surrounded by unimaginable wealth and absolute safety, Leo stood perfectly still, caught between becoming nothing and becoming everything.